This video is long, huh? Welcome back to the Monopoly Cheaters Edition channel, here for your regular reminder that Monopoly Cheaters Edition is, in fact, bad. Unbelievably, after nearly 2 hours of content and a short video summarizing all of the problems MCE has from those 2 videos, there is still more new stuff for me to talk about in detail regarding MCE. Spoiler alert, MCE still isn't a good game. The topics I cover today are directly brought to you by commenters from the previous videos in this series, and like the title of the video suggests, some of you got a bit silly with your comments. So here's a bit of context. I made the first MCE video and it was quite successful. Turns out a lot of people share my frustrations with MCE. Some people got a little silly in the comments of that video, which led to me making an even longer follow-up video where I directly addressed counter-arguments against my overwhelmingly negative take on MCE. After that video was complete, I felt free, because it was at that point I had basically covered everything there was to cover about MCE, and it was clear in my mind that it wouldn't be worth making another video like that, because there wouldn't be enough content. I even made that short recap video with the hopes that it would be the definitive and complete resource for people wondering what's wrong with MCE. However, as time passed, I realized that my work may not be done quite yet. Slowly, over the course of many months, I received some absurdly silly comments, sillier than I had ever seen up until that point. Some of these comments were literal paragraphs long. Some contained concepts so unusual and obscure that I never could have imagined them fitting into a counter-argument supporting MCE. At first, there were only a few of these scattered around the series, so I thought, well, it's no big deal. I'll just respond to the comment like I normally would, take a screenshot of the comment, and place it in a folder for safekeeping should I ever need to revisit that topic in a future MCE video. Perhaps one day, if this folder gets big enough, I'll make another MCE video covering these topics, I thought to myself ignorantly. And I never thought about those comments again, until one day, literal months later, I realized, hey, wait a second, I have over 40 screenshots in this folder. Sitting there looking at that number, I was in disbelief. When the second MCE video was uploaded, I genuinely thought there would be no need to once again come back to this graveyard and dig up the unrecognizable corpse of MCE, only to beat it with the shovel I used to dig it up. But here we are, in the graveyard. I never thought this would be possible. I do want to do something different with this video though. Since I have all of the comments saved in a folder, I thought it would be fun to do a recording of me reading them and then turning that audio into an Ace Attorney style bit for your entertainment. Like I said, it has been months since I've seen these, and while I remember some of the most absurd things said to me, I don't remember nearly everything, so it'll kind of be a reaction as well. Then I'll provide my full counter to the argument. These will be a combination of the original response I left on those comments, as well as any additional points I've been able to think of while making this video. I will be directly quoting the comments left on my videos because they're in a public space, assuming the original commenters didn't go back and delete them out of shame, and because a lot of people left comments on the second MCE video saying they didn't believe there would be people out there writing counter-arguments so whack, and that I was over-exaggerating their arguments for content. This has never been the case, obviously, so only direct quotes will be used to represent YouTube commenters. I also want to take it a step further with this video though. While trying to decide how to order the various topics of this video, I had the idea of starting with the comment that contained the least amount of logical or argumentative fallacies, and slowly making my way to the comment that contained the most. Meaning this video is sure to get more wacky as it goes. Yippee for viewer retention. So, just to be extra clear so I don't get any comments questioning what the point of the video is, this video aims to entertain, counter arguments made against my first 2 MCE videos, delve deeper into various MCE topics, react to silly comments, make funny Ace Attorney sketches, and inform commenters what logical fallacies they used in their writing. This video is not about harassing people on the internet. A good chunk of these comments actually harass me, so if anything, this video is about harassing me. Commenters' names and profile pictures are not shown, and even with that in mind, many of these comments no longer exist because the original commenter went back and deleted them. That's why I took screenshots, by the way, so these topics wouldn't be lost to time. I do think it's quite important for you to have the context of the first two MCE videos I made in order to fully understand what's going on in this one. Please heed my advice and watch those first for context if you haven't already. I want you to understand the jokes being made, you know? At the very least, watch the short recap video I did to know every point I've made against MCE itself. I'll leave links to all of these in the description. Gee, is this intro long enough for you yet? Alright, let's actually get into it. On to the first case we go. Enjoy. Although I really enjoyed this video, and the previous one, and think you make your points very well, I don't think your complaints about the handcuffs are valid. In the first video, you mentioned that the only reason why the handcuffs existed was because of the cheater card that allowed you to take it off, which of course you would rarely get away with. However, and you indirectly mention it, but the main reason why it's there is to be annoying for whoever's in jail. For example, like you mentioned accidentally shifting the board. But the main reason why the cuff is there is to make it so you can only move one hand properly, and thus it makes it harder for you to cheat whilst you're in jail. I would agree that more than one person should be able to be in jail at the same time, but I think Hasbro knew that multiple handcuffs would be too expensive. And on top of that, the person in jail probably changes more often, because it could be so you don't have to wear the cuff for too long. But I don't know if that level of thought was put into this game. And yes, the cuff is really annoying, but isn't the point of being in the jail space to be punished? I know in normal Monopoly, sometimes you want to be in jail at the end of the game so you don't land on other players' well-built properties, whilst collecting money from your own. So considering the main tool you use in this game is the cheat mechanic, and being cuffed makes it harder to subtly take more money or whatever, personally I think that validates the handcuff's existence. I remember seeing this game in a shop a while ago and considered buying it, but after these videos I don't think I will. Don't have anyone to play it with right now anyway. Other than that one small thing, I think these videos were great, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. Your comment is fantastic. It's polite, it brings new ideas to the table, it's well written, and it even makes some valid points. When it comes to my point you're addressing against the handcuff, I was addressing the meta reason for the handcuff's existence during that portion. Obviously, the in-game intention for the handcuff is to hinder the player wearing it, but this is probably one of the worst ways to go about it. If Hasbro didn't want to add a problematic solution to this issue, they would just restrict jailed players from cheating at all in the rules of the game. They didn't do that though, instead choosing to create a game component that bumps up the game's price by $5 whole and is of such low quality. The handcuff is too small, physically uncomfortable at best, and a game-ruining and ableist gimmick at worst. Of course, adding more than one handcuff would be too expensive, and that's just another meta justification which doesn't make sense in the context of the game itself. The handcuff is indeed an awfully designed game component. Punishments in board games should not be physically uncomfortable or impossible to execute, and they most certainly shouldn't vary from player to player if you're trying to create a fair experience. Once again, there are much better solutions out there to punish players for being in jail than this monstrosity. The handcuff should never have been conceived, really. So yes, the handcuff certainly serves its real-world gameplay purpose well, that being to restrict jailed players from cheating so freely, but that being said, there are much better ways to go about doing it. Your comment is fantastic. I will be assigning no penalties. Hey, welcome to the grading screen. Once each segment of the video ends, you'll get to see the commenter's assigned grade here. One grade level will be deducted for each logical fallacy or flawed tactic they use in their argument. Whenever a new logical fallacy or flawed tactic is used for the first time, I'll be sure to describe it for you, don't worry. Because this commenter's argument is well written and logical, there are no flaws to point out. They get an A+. Congratulations! That's the best possible grade you can receive in this video. Before I move on to the next segment, I have an extra point to make. Extra points are just arguments or points that didn't fit that cleanly into the debunking of any comments, but I still felt that they were important enough to cover. They'll show up throughout the video. Here's the first one now. There's a game component in MCE which I haven't covered in this series before, and it's the Bailout Community Chest card. So if you have this card and you go bankrupt, instead of being eliminated from the game, you stay alive and gain $1,250 for free. On paper, this isn't a terrible catch-up mechanic, especially when you remember that mortgaging properties isn't a thing in MCE. The problem is, it doesn't matter how much money you get back, it can all be stolen from you anyway using the cheat system, no matter the amount. So really, this is more so delaying the inevitable than actually helping you. At the very least, this card forces you to rely on the cheat system to regain your previously lost property before you're instantly eliminated again. Yet another example of not much thought being put into MCE's game design. Okay, the one point on playing casually is kinda right though. If you know the game is bad, sometimes the only way to have fun is to just around and mess with people. There's no harm in playing for fun if there's no real incentive to win. One genre of video game that gained popularity is roguelikes. Do you know what the core mechanic in roguelikes is? Dying. And not just that, gamblers win only a tiny fraction of their games, and yet they still have a blast. I could try to bring Dark Souls into this, but I'd be lying, as that is more of an experience to learn from mistakes and optimize your playstyle to get good. So yeah, aside from that one constructive criticism about the possibility that maybe a game isn't supposed to be played seriously, this follow-up video is really good, and I love hearing your voice filled with so much emotions and drama as you rant. It's hilarious, and even if I don't fully know what you've been through, it makes me feel a portion of your frustration. And on an unrelated note, Uno Amalgam is a lot of fun. Aw, thanks! Regardless of the game's actual quality though, MCE wasn't designed around that form of play. Games are designed around optimal play. The ones that aren't almost always suffer from crippling game breaks like MCE does. If you aren't playing a game to win it, you aren't even playing the game. You're doing something completely different and unintended by the developers. It's totally possible to play a game in an unintended way and have fun, but that doesn't make the game itself any better or fix any of its flaws. Players shouldn't have to make their own fun, it should be the game's job to instigate that. I'm not sure comparing video games to board games strengthens the point here. Like, yes, roguelike games involve game resets as a core mechanic, but that doesn't mean you aren't going to try and win them. You play a run of The Binding of Isaac to get to the end and win. You play a run of Inscription Casey's mod to get to the end and win. Real-world gamblers play games to win money. They aren't being dismissive of their money or actively trying to lose it, they want to win more. You play Dark Souls to defeat the bosses so you can win. What are you even doing in a game if you aren't trying to win? I never said that losing couldn't be fun if that's what you're implying. Obviously part of the fun of any game is actually playing it. MCE fails in this regard as well in my opinion, but the reason you play games is to win them. It doesn't matter if you're trying to have a chill night with friends or if you're barely paying attention to the game, it doesn't matter if the game is actually fun or not. If you're playing the game as intended, that means you're trying to win. That's the point I was making with that portion of the video. I'm glad you enjoyed the video, I just felt I should further elaborate on what I said in it. Fantastic comment.
platinum medal.
There were a lot of people who misinterpreted my words in the second MCE video, specifically my people play games to win them segment. I'm going to try and make my point as clear as possible because I can see how it could be confusing. People responded saying things like, well, I don't play games to win them, I play them to have fun. I play them to enjoy time with my friends and family. I play them in group settings to meet new people. Things like that. That's great, but that's not the point I was making. There is a major difference between your outside the game reason for playing a game and your inside the game reason for playing a game. The outside the game reason can be whatever you want. You can play games for fun, friendship, for competition, whatever. It doesn't really matter why people choose to play games because the reasons are infinite and can't be controlled. And people thought I was talking about that when I said my people play games to win them segment, when that's not the case. I was talking about the inside the game reason for playing a game. When you sit down to play a game for whatever outside reason you may have, and actually physically begin playing the game, what are you actually physically doing? You're actually physically playing the game! That's what you're doing. And what is the logical, factual, undeniable, objective goal of multiplayer PvP games, as well as almost all single-player and multiplayer cooperative games? So essentially, almost all games to ever exist? To win. People play games to win them. This is what you're actually physically trying to do when you're playing games. You're trying to win. That's the goal. So once again, if you aren't trying to win while playing games, what are you even doing? I'll tell you what you're doing. Whether you're doing this intentionally or not, you're not even playing the game. At the very least, you're not playing the game as intended. Games are designed around players winning and trying to win. So if you're choosing not to do that, then you're not playing the game as intended. What a tryhard. How about you just accept that some people play games more casually than you? Oh, hi there, person who couldn't find anything wrong with my arguments and resorted to calling me a tryhard. Glad you could join me for this segment, because guess what? Casual versus competitive play has nothing to do with the facts. Obviously, competitive players are going to play to win because they're being competitive, but you imply that players can play games so casually that they aren't even trying to win. Well, do I have news for you, buddy? If you're playing so casually that you're foregoing mechanics, ignoring strategies, removing skills, or being so chill and relaxed and casual that you aren't trying to win the game, then congratulations, you aren't even playing the game anymore. At the very least, you are not playing the game as intended. Because of this, your counter-argument is rendered completely meaningless in a critique space that aims to critique MCE based on how people play it, rules as written. Don't worry, I played the game rules as written, I played the game as intended, and that's the game I'm critiquing, not this watered down MCE you're choosing to ignore the flaws of. It also doesn't matter what reason you have for not playing the game in the intended way. You're still doing it. I play games suboptimally because I play with my younger siblings, so I nerf my own gameplay and don't try as hard. Sorry, but while your younger siblings are likely playing to the best of their ability, in this case, if you're choosing to nerf your own gameplay, you are not playing the game as intended. I play this game, but I change the rules so it will be more fun. Glad you're having fun, but that's still not playing the game as intended. I play games, but I don't like winning all the time, so I'd rather someone else win anyway. How kind of you, but if you're limiting your own gameplay while everyone else doesn't have those limits, you aren't playing the game as intended. Hopefully this was clear enough for everyone, because this is true for almost any game, not just MCE, so it's kinda important to understand. And obviously, don't let this stop you from playing a game however you and your group enjoy it the most. Just understand that these changes you make to your gameplay are not intended by the game devs, and results of your experiences will vary because of that. Anyway, some people misinterpreted my people play games to win them segment in a completely different way. Their claim was something along the lines of, well, people can totally play games to lose them stupid, and then they link me to AlphaRad's video about playing Mario Party but trying to get the lowest score possible to win, or they talk about death percent speedruns in games. Well, once again, say it with me now, you aren't playing the game as intended! That much is obvious. Even in a sandbox game like Minecraft, where you have the option of doing anything you want at any speed, it's not like Minecraft was originally built and designed around the idea of dying as fast as possible, so don't pretend it was. And wacky challenges like that AlphaRad video are openly admitting to not playing the game as intended. Even if that wasn't the case though, all they did in that video was change the win condition from get the highest score to get the lowest score, and the people who participated were all still clearly trying to win, even though they weren't winning by the game's definition. Players play games to win them, and AlphaRad invented a new game within an existing one, and people tried to win it. This same logic applies to all goal challenges people make to existing games. It doesn't even have to be about losing necessarily. The goal can be anything. Rake in the lake percent in Breath of the Wild, create a stalemate challenges, longest turn challenges, most actions per turn game challenges. The game wasn't built with these challenges in mind, so you're not playing the game as intended. Especially when the challenges hinder your chances of winning the game as intended in any way. Obviously, silly things like this can still be fun and interesting, but you're basically inventing an entirely new game within the game, and there's no reason for me to address things like that in a critical review of a game like MCE, because all of those things are completely made up. Alright, that's enough of that. On to the next bit. I have to say, if these rules weren't designed to explicitly encourage players to use the keep all of your possessions on you as to make it difficult for other players to cheat you technique, why have them? What is the point of a cheater's edition if not to create that sort of paranoid competitive environment? Like, I understand finding the actual execution of the game design unfulfilling, but if anything is a system working as intended, it's that kind of player behavior. I do agree that it seems more by design than what he lets on in the video, but even so, that's some questionably clunky game design. You are both correct. MCE's core design really pushes on the paranoid aspects of human behavior and mechanically incentivizes you to not only defend your own possessions like Golem defends his ring, but to also use the cheats against other players the instant their guard is down. In that respect, this behavior is not only intended by the devs of MCE, but executed amazingly. Unfortunately, the compliments end there, because this is where MCE falls apart in a major way. MCE incentivized this paranoia style of gameplay too well, and failed to account for the consequences in the game's rules. People are so paranoid about making sure their possessions aren't stolen that they'll resort to tactics, clearly unintended by the developers, like that whole taking your stuff with you when you leave the table thing. Clearly this tactic was something the devs never considered, which is why this strategy completely destroys the game, as I already covered in previous videos. In summary, it makes the cheats and therefore the game not only meaningless, but objectively unfair to those who aren't present at the table at any given moment. So to me, it seems fairly obvious the devs didn't think the players would take it that far when it came to defending their possessions. And because of this, there is no rule in the game to counter this game-breaking behavior. All it would have taken is one sentence saying something along the lines of, if a player ever needs to leave the board, the game is paused, so nobody can cheat during this time. It seriously is that easy to fix. So, once again, you are correct. Paranoia is indeed intended by the game devs, and they succeeded in creating it. Unfortunately, the rules of MCE are far too loose to account for the human response to the generated paranoia. Completely valid points here.
You earned a platinum medal.
There were some people who didn't like the way I used the word objectively in the second MCE video. Like, yes, obviously my MCE critique videos have some of my opinions in them, but when I use the word objectively, I don't use it incorrectly. Really quickly, I'm going to go over all 7 times I use the word objectively in my second MCE video. The first time I use it refers to some YouTube comments on the first MCE video which were indeed factually incorrect, and I counter them in this video. Things like the handcuff being connected to the board argument. The second use refers to how MCE's mechanics are flawed from a game design perspective. This is not a matter of opinion. This game is full of flawed things like unintended infinite money exploits, ableist game components, rules that trivialize other rules, etc. The fun factor has nothing to do with game design flaws. The third use is an anti-objective statement, so there's no issue there. The fourth use is a repeat of the second use. The fifth, sixth, and seventh uses are all referring to the argument that base Monopoly takes no skill or strategy, which factually is not the case, as I proved in this video, meaning once again, there are no issues there. There are certainly parts of this video where I display my opinion on MCE, but when I use the word objectively, I never use the word incorrectly. Those statements are based on fact. This is yet another example of how there simply is no counter-argument or defense for a lot of MCE's core problems. For example, MCE has multiple, not just one, infinite money exploits, and the fact of the matter is they exist, and there's nothing you can really do about them unless you change MCE yourself, which is most certainly in your best interest should you have this game forced upon you. I still disagree with the idea that taking pieces away from the play area being a problem. Okay. In terms of protecting game components, I can understand, but saying it trivializes the game and that it's not addressed in the rules because it's absurd isn't a good defense. It kinda goes back to the idea of playing optimally. My optimal play is to reduce the impact of cheats against me. If that means playing 6 feet away from other players and the board at all times, or taking pieces with me everywhere I go, that's just optimal risk reduction play, and says less about the players and more about the bad game design itself. If the best way to win is to remove the fun of the cheating mechanic from the game with optimal protection tactics, then it's just a badly designed game. The sitting 6 feet away, strategy, and taking things with you wherever you go, strategy, are far from intended game mechanics though, and you can tell because it trivializes many of the cheats. How is entire mechanics being trivialized not a good argument against MCE? With these strategies in place, the property swap and pickpocket cheats have become essentially impossible to pull off, and other cheats that have the option to interact with players in a similar way, like the slippery deed and surprise demolition cheats, have had half of their functionality made essentially impossible. Clearly this strategy was not intended by the developers. Why put these cheats in the game in the first place if the intended strategy is to sit 6 feet away from all players and keep your possessions on you at all times? MCE attempts to maintain the status quo of base Monopoly, as well as the vast majority of other tabletop games, by assuming the game stays at the table and doesn't extend beyond it. Unlike other games, however, MCE adds paranoia and mechanics that would incentivize these absurd strategies. And they fail to account for such things in the rules, resulting in the rules not only feeling unfinished, but the game itself completely breaking with many cheats becoming trivialized once these strategies come into play. So yes, this game really is just poorly designed, but it's completely on the players for assuming these physical separation strategies are part of the intended game mechanics when they so clearly are not.
You earned a platinum medal.
You can set up a security camera before you go to the toilet, or making deals using that. You are a stinky if you do that. Also, that could have been a great mechanic, paying some money to access the camera footage. A strategy that might work is faking cheating, so players think, is he cheating, or is he faking it? Maybe almost possibly making it a social deduction game. Faking cheating is easier than faking not cheating. You can also place an upside down cup on the board to help that by covering a space. You can also by printing fake money, or fake chance cards, using it yourself or replacing the real bank money, but also destroying the fun for the other players a bit, and making people go insane that way. You can also tell someone else, if you distract them by cheating, I will split the bank robbery money. Also, YouTube detected this as Monopoly for specifically Nintendo Switch. Also, I only watched the first video like a month ago, and I have dementia, so some of this may be easily debunkable. Your comment is less of a counter-argument to my points and more so a series of suggestions or just various ways you could improve the game, and honestly that's fantastic. If there's anything MCE needs, it's help. I did talk about this topic in another MCE video already, like you can improve the game all you want by modifying its rules or adding in new rules, and if that's what makes the game fun for you and your friends, go for it. That's great. But remember that at that point you aren't playing MCE anymore. You're playing a completely different game, so you're not really defending MCE, you're just changing it. That all being said, you did tee me up to debunk your ideas, so I shall. Something like a security camera surely is not intended to be incorporated into this game. The existence of one would make using the cheat system effectively impossible. On top of that, there's the whole accessibility issue of not owning a camera in the first place, and Hasbro can't expect a game to function without a game component as crucial as this, assuming this was their intention. Cups, printers, fake money, fake chance cards or chest cards, etc. You're adding all of that to the game yourself. You're creating new mechanics, you're changing the game. Those various props are certainly not part of the intended game, and not part of the game I talked about for so long. You can negotiate in the way you describe though. That's totally legal, rules as written. You can also fake cheat in MCE rules as written, and there's nothing to directly counter it, making it an incredibly powerful and broken interaction. The inclusion of these mechanics does not make MCE a social deduction game though, because once again, there are no mechanics present that actually involve deducing something socially. Overall, your comment is funny and creative, and I can't penalize it too much. Like I said, it's less an argument and more a list of suggestions for improvements. I'll give it one count of the uninformed fallacy, only because you didn't know about the fake bluffing exploit from the rules of MCE or my videos. Still a fantastic comment. Nice job. Hey, now I finally get to do something with this screen.
You earned a gold medal.
Let's learn about the uninformed fallacy. The uninformed fallacy. This is not an officially recognized logical fallacy, because in the professional world this nearly never occurs. I'm sure that it has an official name somewhere, but I'm calling it the uninformed fallacy. The uninformed fallacy is demonstrated when someone presents blatantly incorrect information about the topic, or information that was already covered, without bringing anything new to the table, and therefore not countering any argument. For the purposes of this video, the uninformed fallacy demonstrates the commenter probably didn't watch or fully comprehend the video they are arguing against, or are unaware of MCE's rules. It's also possible they don't fully understand how MCE works. This fallacy can be completely avoided by viewing and understanding the necessary materials before even beginning to develop your argument. By using this fallacy, your entire argument could lose its value, because you've made it clear you may not even know what you're talking about. Stay informed and do your research. That may sound a bit harsh, but I assure you, an A grade is still phenomenal. Excellent work. This is just a hunch, but I feel that Base Monopoly's name may have been tarnished by the internet and/or Hasbro themselves. In my opinion, Monopoly's weakness is its age as a board game, and how the tabletop gaming landscape has evolved a lot over time around it, while it hasn't changed too much to adapt. In truth, there isn't that much that's mechanically flawed with Base Monopoly, and a lot of the reasons people hate it don't make a lot of sense. There were a startling amount of people in the comments of previous videos that said something along the lines of, well, Monopoly is terrible, so of course MCE is bad as well. Saying things like that doesn't actually address what you dislike about Base Monopoly, and doesn't even add to the MCE is bad argument either. And I seriously mean this when I say nearly all of the people who left comments bashing Base Monopoly had poor reasoning or no reasoning at all for doing so. They said things like, Monopoly was designed poorly on purpose, yada yada landlord's game. But Monopoly is different now in the modern day, so comparisons like that are harder to draw, especially when it's likely none of the people who left those comments have actually played the original landlord's game to make that comparison. I obviously have no proof here, but considering the landlord's game's age and the average age of my audience, and how obtaining a copy of the landlord's game is quite difficult nowadays, I'd say it's a safe assumption. People said Monopoly takes no skill or strategy, which is something that is factually untrue. I've already covered this in great depth in the second episode of this series. People said Monopoly takes too long to play, and like, okay, that's not an argument, that is your preference. Just because you don't like long games doesn't mean the game is automatically bad. There are many games that have long play times and yet are far better than Monopoly, so game length has nothing to do with it. And if Monopoly's length is your only complaint, lucky you, Hasbro made Monopoly Speed. People said Monopoly is too random, but Monopoly only has 3 randomness mechanics, and almost all games in existence have at least one randomness mechanic, so get over it. People said the groups that they play with refuse to engage with the trading mechanics, resulting in a lame time. And I agree, if players in your group are straight up refusing to engage with the best and arguably most fun mechanic in the game, and arguably the most crucial mechanic in the game if you want to win, then the game does turn into an RNG dice rolling simulator, and that sucks. That being said though, it's not Monopoly's fault that your players refuse to use all of the game's mechanics to their advantage. Monopoly does plenty to incentivize trading with its board and property design, and if your players aren't willing to use one of the most powerful and versatile mechanics in the game, then that is completely on them. I know it's bad to blame the player for a game's shortcomings, it's far too common nowadays, but this isn't even a shortcoming considering the mechanics are there, but people just aren't using them for some reason. Players are actively hurting the intended gameplay experience, and the overall experience of their group, and their own chances of winning by not engaging with the trading mechanics. Imagine playing Seven Wonders but refusing to use the science cards, ever, despite how powerful they are. Imagine playing Uno but refusing to play blue cards because blue is your least favorite color. Imagine playing chess but refusing to use your queen. Sounds awful and often unwinnable, right? Of course it is. Games are intended to be played with their entire rule set, and if you or your group refuse to use a mechanic as central and integral as the trading mechanics of Monopoly for whatever reason, sorry to say it, but you're not playing Monopoly as it was intended to be played. Especially since without the one mechanic of Monopoly that requires the infinitely complex concept that is human interaction, you are almost completely leaving it to RNG to decide who wins. And that sounds like the bad game all of these angry commenters are playing, honestly. Please. If you are one of those people that refuses to use the trading system in Base Monopoly, give it a shot, or give it another shot. Give it a chance. I don't know why you're so against it to begin with, but I promise you that if you and your group play the game as intended, you'll have a much better time than the dice rolling simulator you're used to. Anyway, I essentially covered all of those topics in previous videos, but I just thought I'd summarize here, because you know what people didn't bring up when they were complaining about base Monopoly? The fact that the game could theoretically go on forever if people kept avoiding each other's properties with their dice rolls. Some people said the game can go on for a long time, but I'm not sure anyone brought up this topic, which I consider an actual mechanical flaw of base Monopoly. It really does have the power to go on forever. Of course, due to probability and player input, it essentially never does. But it could if you let it. Like, if you're going to hate on base Monopoly, at least hate an aspect of it that actually is poorly designed. Or, like I said earlier, you could dislike it due to the general design philosophy being outdated and unupdated, which is completely true. There are an uncountable number of games that are designed better than Monopoly because tabletop gaming as a whole has evolved, while modern Monopoly keeps getting reprints to be Game of Thrones themed. Please don't just hate Monopoly for no reason. Take the time to play it for yourself as intended and form your own opinions and find real flaws. Or just take the time to realize your game preferences and make the call whether Monopoly is your type of game or not. And if it isn't, be cool enough to admit that Monopoly may not be for you, but that doesn't mean it's bad. MCE, on the other hand, terrible! Don't give it a chance! Use my videos to form your opinions instead of playing it yourself or spending $35.99 USD. You'll thank me later. If you can play Monopoly without engaging with the only thing that takes skill, that still makes it a bad game. I'm pretty sure I've already covered this topic somewhere. If players in your group are straight up refusing to engage with the best and arguably most fun mechanic in the game, and arguably the most crucial mechanic in the game if you want to win, then the game does turn into an RNG dice rolling simulator, and that sucks. That being said though, it's not Monopoly's fault that your players refuse to use all of the game's mechanics to their advantage. Monopoly does plenty to incentivize trading with its board and property design, and if your players aren't willing to use one of the most powerful and versatile mechanics in the game, then that is completely on them. I know it's bad to blame the player for a game's shortcomings, it's far too common nowadays, but this isn't even a shortcoming considering the mechanics are there, but people just aren't using them for some reason. Players are actively hurting the intended gameplay experience and the overall experience of their group, and their own chances of winning by not engaging with the trading mechanics. Imagine playing Seven Wonders but refusing to use the science cards, ever, despite how powerful they are. Imagine playing Uno but refusing to play blue cards because blue is your least favorite color. Imagine playing chess but refusing to use your queen. Sounds awful and often unwinnable, right? Of course it is. Games are intended to be played with their entire rule set, and if you or your group refuse to use a mechanic as central and integral as the trading mechanics of Monopoly for whatever reason, sorry to say it, but you're not playing Monopoly as it was intended to be played. Especially since without the one mechanic of Monopoly that requires the infinitely complex concept that is human interaction, you are almost completely leaving it to RNG to decide who wins. And why do you think that? I've played Monopoly a lot over the years, both with family and friends. With friends, we typically negotiate, and with family, we often resort to the buy every property and hope you win strategy. I haven't seen a noticeably different win rate when we incorporate negotiation into the game. Everyone seemed to win evenly. It's the illusion of strategy that doesn't actually impact the outcome significantly, although it does make it more fun in a everything is more fun with friends kind of way. Or, hear me out, it kinda sounds like the people you play with all have about the same skill level. And when you play without the trading mechanics, of course it'll be relatively even who wins every time, because you're essentially leaving it to chance. Also, how is different players winning evenly amongst playthroughs of the game a bad thing? That to me just sounds like a balanced experience, which is what good game design strives for. Regardless, there's tons of strategy in Monopoly, essentially when you play it as intended and use the trading mechanics, so I won't repeat myself here. Additionally, just because players are physically capable of ignoring mechanics in games doesn't mean the games themselves are bad. Like, sure, you could go an entire game of chess without using the queen piece to your advantage, despite it being the most powerful piece you have, but why would you ever want to do that? That situation is very comparable to the trading mechanics and negotiating in base Monopoly. It's one of, if not the most powerful mechanic you have at your disposal, so why ignore it? It doesn't make any logical sense. If you're choosing to ignore mechanics of a game, you aren't playing the game as intended. I suppose because I say I like Monopoly, people may feel the need to explain why they don't like it, even though base Monopoly isn't the main topic of this series. I understand, though. People have a lot of bottled up hatred for base Monopoly, it seems. Points like these almost never help or hurt MCE itself, though.
I just think you had the experience a normal person has trying to play Monopoly, man.
Feel free to elaborate on that at any time. Regardless, MCE is nothing like base Monopoly gameplay-wise, tone-wise, fun-wise, feeling-wise, vibe-wise, etc. The experience of playing MCE is nothing like base Monopoly, and I'm sure you'd know that if you watched the video.
You earned a silver medal.
Whoa, hey, look, a new thing! As well as proof that multiple fallacies and tactics can be present in one sentence or statement. Preference-based evidence tactic. Not a true logical fallacy, but something people tend to do in arguments is rely too much on their preferences or opinions as concrete evidence, when really they should only be brought into play as supporting evidence. Obviously, sharing your opinions about a subject is more than fine, but treating your opinions as facts gets you nowhere in an argument. In this case, this argument functions under the assumption that all normal people, whatever that means, are guaranteed to have negative opinions and experiences with base Monopoly, when that simply isn't the case. Some comments brought up how MCE couldn't possibly be the worst version of Monopoly, and then proceeded to bring up base Monopoly. Hopefully, this series has demonstrated how the opposite is true. Some would also bring up Ms. Monopoly, the game known for having one of the worst board game mechanics of all time, sexism. To be clear, I never claimed that MCE was the worst Monopoly version. MCE is just the worst game that I have personally played. That's right. I've never played Miss Monopoly, and I have no plans to do so considering I am a man. Looking at the rules of Miss Monopoly though, I still think I'd rather play that than MCE. The cheats of MCE aren't present in Miss Monopoly after all, removing many of the problems the game would have if it did. I'm not advocating for Miss Monopoly though. I'm sure there could be plenty of debate over whether MCE or Miss Monopoly is worse, but does it really matter? The main takeaway is that you shouldn't play either of them. They're both terrible in their own special ways. If you're interested in learning more about Miss Monopoly, I've left a link in the description to this video by Cam Sandwich, which covers some Monopoly versions. He explains it quite well, and ensures I'll never have to make a video on that darned thing. Thanks, Cam. I'm firmly in the Monopoly is just a bad game, even if MCE is even worse on its own merits crowd. I don't think most people actually like Monopoly, they just act like they like it because it's familiar. But when we try to play it, and I've never seen anyone actually end up having enough fun to bother actually finishing out the game. They just refuse every possible fair trade that could possibly advance the game. Lol, can't let someone get a Monopoly even if I get one too because the other two players said don't. Repeat ad nauseum for hours until everyone eventually gives up one by one from boredom or exhaustion. Once everything's bought up and we think we know who's pulled out ahead enough to be winning. And then everyone agrees to play something else next time on game night, because we all end up agreeing that it's awful. I have finished a higher percentage of games of Risk than I have of Monopoly, and my friends hate Risk too. Whoa, dude, why are you bringing Risk into this? So your opinion is that Monopoly is bad. In fact, you say you hate it. You also say your friends hate it just as much as they hate Risk. If you hate anything, you hold a negative opinion of it. So you blatantly say that you yourself, as well as your friend group you choose to play games with, collectively hate Monopoly. So, like, my question is, if you all already know that you hate Monopoly, then why are you choosing to play it? It kinda just seems like you're setting yourself up for a miserable time. If you all don't like a game, why play it? But on top of that, you acknowledge that the people you play with are choosing not to engage with one of the core mechanics of the game that I personally feel plays a huge part in making the game fun and interesting. If players are refusing to engage with the most fun mechanic in the game and arguably the most crucial mechanic in the game win, the game does turn into a RNG excellent simulator. And as such, that being said though, it's not Monopoly's fault that players refuse to use all the game's mechanics to their advantage. Monopoly is the game is board and game is board and farm design. And if your players aren't willing to use the most powerful versus mechanics in the game, then it's completely on them. And it's bad to blame the player for using shortcomings. It's far beyond nowadays. This is the shortcomings are there. Players are actively hurting the experience and the experience of the group and the chances of winning by not engaging with trading mechanics. Managing some refusing to use the science parts ever. Stop power managing low, refusing to play good cards, losing your color, managing chess, refusing to use your queen. Sounds awful often unbelievable. What is this? Instructing to play your entire rule set. And if you or your group refuse to use the mechanic as central and integral as the trading mechanic of Monopoly, sorry to say it, you're not playing Monopoly the way it's intended to be played. Especially since Alpha 1 mechanic of Monopoly that requires you to complex concept that is human interaction. You also completely need RNG design. Here's a quote from my second video. If your games of Monopoly are actually an hour long at maximum, then it's likely you're just rolling dice, going around the board, buying properties, and not engaging with the negotiation portion of the game at all. And maybe that's why you aren't enjoying Monopoly. And maybe that's why you think Monopoly takes no skill, because you're actively choosing not to engage with the one part of the game that requires a skill. So indeed, I did cover this topic. If you aren't willing to play the game to its fullest, that's a player problem, not a game problem. You assume most people dislike Monopoly. I'd like to see the data there. This large portion of your comment where you address your opinions on Monopoly retreads a topic I already covered. Also, I don't know to what degree your friends hate Risk, making it an unhelpful unit of measurement in your argument. Still a solid grade, because you're mostly just presenting your opinion, but you've made it clear that you and your friend group are playing Monopoly in an unintended way, giving your opinion on the game far less weight.
You earned a bronze medal.
Hasty generalizations fallacy. Hasty generalizations is a logical fallacy where you draw a conclusion with little to no evidence or biased evidence. You don't have enough relevant facts to draw a conclusion, so you assume, you generalize, and you draw a conclusion out of thin air. If you don't have evidence for your argument and you jump straight to the conclusion, you skipped the most important step of writing an argument, the actual reasoning behind your argument. Without sufficient evidence, your argument has nothing to stand on, and you're just kinda saying stuff for no reason. Unhelpful info tactic. This one isn't a fallacy because it doesn't completely derail your argument like the other ones do. This is just something you should avoid doing when writing an argument, generally speaking. This tactic is demonstrated when you present information as part of your argument that doesn't actually support your argument. It either sits there and does nothing, or actively hurts your argument in the worst case. Keep your arguments relevant and on topic, and you should never run into this. Let's talk about good versus bad game design for a moment. I feel like this is obvious, but there are no set rules for how to make a tabletop game. Any aspect of any game to ever exist can be evaluated as good or bad in the opinion of any player. A perfectly designed game could still be labeled as bad by any individual, and any tabletop slop could be labeled as good by any individual. Good versus bad in a vacuum is opinion-oriented. That all being said, good versus bad and flawless versus flawed are two very different things. Games are more than capable of being flawed regardless of how people view them. There are so many ways to determine if an aspect of a game is flawed or not. You can use developer intention, you can use other aspects of the same game for comparison, you could use your experience with the game to draw logical conclusions, etc. For example, there are many cheat benefits in MCE that are extremely powerful. Gaining free properties, hotels, and money instantly is an incredible reward for mostly little effort. Because these cheat reward mechanics are present, all of the ways that you would legitimately acquire properties, hotels, and money become completely obsolete. This logically brings into question why these legitimate methods are present in the game at all. It's almost like an afterthought, like the developers forgot to remove the obsolete mechanics from base Monopoly's rules, and the result is a bunch of unnecessary rule clutter. The very fact that existing mechanics in MCE completely trivialize other existing mechanics is a game design flaw. If that example isn't enough for you, how about the handcuff? Due to the handcuff's limited range of sizes, some players will be unable to wear the handcuff. This physically prevents them from playing the game properly, which is something they, the player, cannot control. This also puts them at an extreme and blatantly unfair disadvantage against other players who are able to wear the handcuff normally. This game component is flawed. Anyways, while there may be no such thing as objectively good or bad game design, a game's flaws will always make themselves known, and in my opinion, the more flawed a game is, the more the negative context of the word bad becomes applicable when describing it. Making the claim that everything I elaborate on in this series is a matter of opinion, despite the absurd number of factual flaws found in MCE, is deliberately choosing to ignore my analyses, and makes for an incredibly weak counterargument that counters none of my actual points, just pretends they don't exist.
You're talking about a game focused on cheating, not being fair and balanced? Just think about that for a minute. If you're playing the normal game with a cheater, the game is already unfair and unbalanced. With this game, you go in knowing it.
Of course, real cheating is unbalanced. The game incorporates new mechanics that are only called cheats by name, but performing them isn't against the rules of the game. The 15 cheats are intended mechanics, and they're all flawed to the point of making the game unfair and tedious, especially when they break the game. Real cheating is against the rules of MCE. It even says so in the rulebook. You go into this game like you would any other.
And to have all eyes on other players will make it much harder to cheat, so that much more satisfying when you get away with something, no matter how big or small the cheat is.
Obviously, that can depend on the mentality of your player group, but regardless, the cheats themselves are mechanically flawed. There isn't really any fair fun to be taken out of them. It doesn't matter how satisfying pulling off a cheat is when the game and the cheats themselves are built and balanced so poorly. And like I said in the video, the more your group tries to prevent cheating, the more stressful and hostile the game environment becomes. In my experience with this game, either one or more people were constantly getting away with cheats because people were too mentally exhausted from monitoring everyone else for cheating, or simply didn't care, or nobody got away with cheats because everyone is monitoring everyone else, making the cheats effectively meaningless while still exhausting players. You may get a second of satisfaction from successfully completing a cheat, but in my opinion, it's almost never worth the effort required to exist while playing the rest of this game.
And your whole tone while trying to explain the game or the chapters doesn't help with your case on how bad this game is.
How's that? Very helpful, thanks. What a legitimate defense of MCE.
You earned a bronze medal.
Ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem is a logical fallacy where you attack the author directly rather than actually addressing their arguments. This is something you should never do if you want people to trust your side of the argument. Using ad hominem essentially only demonstrates to your audience that you don't have any valid arguments, or you don't have the necessary information to make your point clear. It also puts a bad taste in the viewer's mouth, because from their perspective, you aren't addressing the important content while simultaneously making yourself look bad. Here's one of my favorite types of counter-arguments. Something along the lines of, if you have received enough counter-arguments that they fill hour-long videos, then maybe you should just accept that you have opinions and other people have different opinions instead of making more videos that won't change anybody's mind. Once again, the flaws of MCE are almost entirely based on fact, not opinion. and the pillars of any argument involving a subject as fact-based as MCE shouldn't be rooted in opinion. Argumentative writing in general is at its best when based on fact. Not to mention, this type of counter-argument fails to counter any of my points once again, essentially proving they have no counters. This type of comment is especially funny when you remember that most of the counter-arguments made against my arguments are logically flawed in their own right. There are many examples of counter-arguments to my points operating without all of the necessary information, lying about specific topics, or not even staying on subject by attacking me personally, and whatnot. I wouldn't have to address nearly as many counter-arguments if people actually made good ones like the ones seen near the beginning of this video. If anything, the fact I'm able to successfully agree with or counter all of these arguments says a lot about the content of the counters themselves and the solid nature of my argument. I think the played optimally argument is a good one. A lot of people playing video games and board games try to min-max the win in the most optimal way possible, rather than relaxing and trying to play in the most fun way possible. It's not about winning or losing, it's the journey to get there. Let's take a video game like Pokemon, for example, that has a PvE and PvP mode. There is an optimal way to play, a way that will see you winning 99 times out of 100, if you only come up against players who are not using one of the strats that are optimal. But those are the least fun ways to play. The most fun you can have is to get out there and try to win with the Pokemon you like, finding ways to work around your weaknesses, learning off of other players doing the same, and dragging a troll team to victory is just the best feeling ever, lol. And similarly, it's at its most fun when I'm just versus friends, who are also there to have a good time. We want to win, yeah, we're trying to win, and technically one of us could go away and learn some pro strats and come back and thrash the others, but there's no joy in that. We're more likely to handicap ourselves at this point because we want to win in some goofy way. I recently did a gym leader challenge where the only Pokemon I could use were rock types versus my friends' other single type teams, but also our multi-type normal fun teams. It was great trying to get rock types to do the heavy lifting for me, XD. And when I won, it was all the better, even though I lost more than I won, and I think people who take the game too seriously are missing out on this kind of silly fun. I want to win. I'm trying to win, but the joy is in hanging out with my friends doing something goofy, not min-maxing a team or deck or whatever, depending on the game. I do think a game has to be enjoyable to start with for this to apply. Most games have a way to min-max, and it's not fun for, I dare say, most players. Only people at the very tippy top of their game can get enjoyment out of min-maxing, and if you're not doing it, playing against those people is boring AF. Anyway, those are just my opinions there, and while that's how me and all my friends play, I do know people who get a kick out of this wild optimization grind, and that's fine too. I just don't think it's common to enjoy a thing on that level, since it requires a silly amount of effort that I certainly am not looking to put in the one time a year play a board game with the fam where I actually want all players, including the kiddos, to have a chance at taking victory. I'm not saying that me is a case of this for you guys. It might have been, it might not have been, I wasn't there. I am saying, though, that the criticism itself isn't as silly as you make it out to be. There is truth to it. It does spoil some games for those people sometimes. Often enough that I've noticed it, and I am a filthy casual, lol. MCE isn't enjoyable no matter how you choose to play it, in my opinion, unfortunately, lol. As I went over in this video, regardless of how casual or competitive your gameplay is, You're punished by the game's poor design. People try to play casually, and they're guaranteed to lose or be bullied for the entire game. People try to play competitively, and the environment becomes even more toxic and stressful. It's a harsh experience, regardless of your preferred playstyle. Regardless of how you choose to play a game, good games are designed with optimal play in mind. MCE clearly wasn't, and that's one of its biggest flaws. You can choose to play games however you want, whether you're trying to make the game more or less challenging or enjoyable. But if the game itself isn't designed for or balanced around optimal play, it will have many issues that only the players will be able to compensate for, and that's something players shouldn't be obligated to do. I'm not saying this Pokemon video game you're referring to is poorly designed. I've never played it, you didn't specify which one it was, I don't know for sure, but if the game relies on players playing suboptimally and holding back just to make the experience more enjoyable or balanced for others, or if there truly is a way to essentially guarantee your victory against another real-world opponent, then it sounds like a poorly designed game to me. Players should never have to hold back their gameplay or change aspects of a game just to make it good, in quotes. If the game were good and fun, it wouldn't need changing. Video games are an entirely different argument and situation as well, so I'm not sure this is the best comparison or not. Especially games that are designed for a single-player campaign first, with PvP modes added later. Not to mention how grindy the Pokemon games can be, and the length of time that you're meant to play it. Regardless, and you admit this, just because min-maxing this game isn't fun for you, doesn't mean it isn't fun for others, or that it's the least fun way to play. And sometimes games truly are only about winning and not the journey. It all depends on many factors, obviously, but it shouldn't be the player's responsibility to limit a game's experience to one form of play, all for the sake of fairness and fun. In an ideal world, games built on competition would be perfectly balanced, or entirely skill-dependent, or both. Unfortunately, there are many games that don't have such a luxury, MCE being one of those games. In the end, play games how you want to play them. Play them in the way that's most fun for you. A fun experience with MCE is quite rare in my experience, regardless of how you choose to play it.
You earned a bronze medal.
Bandwagon appeal fallacy. This fallacy is demonstrated when you present evidence based on popular opinion or what a group of people think, in hopes of getting others to think the same way. It's like peer pressure, but for argumentative writing. I want to talk about the fun factor because it's something I haven't really covered, and I've got a variety of comments that say things like, I think the game is fun, you can have fun with the right group, I have fun playing this game with my dad, things like that. And that's totally valid. You're allowed to have fun with this game. Fun factor isn't really something you can lock down in a review of a game, because everyone has their preferences, yada yada. So the point I want to make with fun factor is like, a game with bad design can still be fun, or you can still have fun with a poorly designed game, but that doesn't change the fact the game is poorly designed. Think of Veilfisk's Torture board game. It's terribly designed on purpose. It was designed to torture people and theoretically go on forever. That being said, the game is hilarious, and it's clear that at least some of the people playing were having fun and laughing. So like, you can have fun with a bad game, that's established. Now, to take it a step further, one thing people try to do is use fun factor as the basis for their counter-argument by essentially claiming the game can't possibly be bad and doesn't deserve hate or criticism if I'm having fun playing it. That's simply not true. Fun factor is supporting evidence, not a main point. Just because you're having fun doesn't mean the game doesn't have all of the problems I talk about in these videos. This was a good video, but I personally dislike how centered it is on comparison. This is a bad game because they removed it, etc., is what it kind of devolves into, which doesn't really explain how the game is made less fun by these decisions. I would have preferred you address it on its own terms, even if it seems kind of counter to the point that it isn't being sold honestly, which I think is sort of unimportant. So originally, I misunderstood this comment. I thought they were one of the few people who thought I should judge MCE on its own merits without comparing it to Monopoly, because they quite literally say, I would have preferred you address it on its own terms. So in response, I directed them to the second video in the series where I go over how it's more than fair to compare a spin-off to the original when you're doing a critical review. Perhaps you should watch the second video in the series where I address this topic. Okay, cool. I'm watching it right now. It doesn't really run counter to what I said, though. Why does simplifying a game make it innately less fun, or worse in this case? This isn't really adequately answered. The bizarre flaws and contradictions with the mechanics, and how those make the game less fun, are far more adequately argued, and I don't really disagree with you on any other point. But simplifying the game, then adding more features, is totally fine as a concept, and I've played a lot of games where this is done well. Now I get it. They think that I think that the simplification of a game's mechanics make it worse. I can kinda see how someone would get that idea from my words in the first MCE video, considering how I make the less than Monopoly statement and all that, but that wasn't the point of that bit of the video. The point of that bit was to demonstrate how much of Monopoly's core mechanics were being removed, resulting in a Monopoly spin-off that feels less and less like base Monopoly. I even elaborate on this in the second video where I'm addressing how the cheats make the mechanics from base Monopoly trivial. Quote me, because the cheats are so powerful, there is no reason to obtain money via rent. There's no reason to buy properties legitimately. There's no reason to acquire money legitimately. There's no reason to purchase hotels. There is no reason to negotiate. There's no reason to engage with almost every single mechanic from base Monopoly, and for that reason, they might as well not exist. There's no reason for this game to be called Monopoly Cheaters Edition, because the Monopoly side of things is completely meaningless. It should just be called Cheaters Edition, honestly. The problem I was addressing was not the simplification of the game, but rather the removal of some of Monopoly's core aspects. The end result is that MCE is a game that feels nothing like Monopoly. You have no incentive to engage with the base mechanics in optimal play. It's effectively only a Monopoly game in name, and that's the problem. People expect at least some Monopoly in their Monopoly experience, but MCE doesn't provide that. I never said complexity is inherently better in games. The fact of the matter is, I bought a Monopoly spin-off game and I expected a decent amount of Monopoly mechanics involved. In MCE, the optimal play is to ignore those mechanics entirely, and about a fourth of them are removed beforehand, so it doesn't invoke any feelings of Monopoly gameplay at all. What you are saying here and what you said in the video don't match up. You didn't elaborate that you meant the change in conjunction with the added mechanics made the game feel like it wasn't Monopoly. You argued from the position that before the new mechanics were even considered, the game is less than Monopoly, etc. Which, following this logic, encompasses about half of the Monopoly variations, by the way. The cheats are, by your own admission, not discussed for the entire beginning of the video. I made both of these arguments in a way. When I say the game is lesser Monopoly, that's just true. There's quite literally less Monopoly in the box. That was the first point. They removed so many mechanics. But the game also doesn't feel anything like Monopoly because of all of the changes and how it plays. And I go over this in the second video because I talk about how this game shouldn't be a Monopoly game because it doesn't feel like one when you play it. And you point out that this encompasses about half of the existing Monopoly variants, and that's also just true. It's sad, and I personally don't like it, but it's true. It doesn't really help your argument though. And then you say I don't address the cheats for the beginning portion of the video. Like, yes, You're right, that's because I was busy giving you my author context and making this very point. It was never my intention to imply that simplifying a game makes it worse. That just isn't true, so it would be silly of me to argue that. Both of these segments you are referring to from the first and second video are meant to demonstrate how little MCE even relates to Monopoly in the end. The combination of removing several mechanics from the base game and then making the remaining original mechanics trivial with the newly introduced mechanics results in an experience that feels nothing like Monopoly. And this is the problem. This game is called Monopoly Cheaters Edition. Like I already covered, if this game was a standalone experience with no ties to Monopoly, a lot of my problems with the game would disappear. But because the word Monopoly is on the front of the box, I, as a consumer, expect an experience that is at least similar to the original. Simplifying the game like Monopoly Junior does, or making an entirely new game that's simple to begin with, aren't bad things to do. The problem arises when you take a game that your consumers enjoy, remove beloved mechanics, and change the gameplay to the point where the game itself is unrecognizable, and then still label it as part of the same game series. People buying MCE expecting any of the feelings or experiences base Monopoly gives them, which would be quite logical considering the word Monopoly is on the front of the box, are getting robbed and bamboozled. If this sounds familiar, it should, because I already covered this topic in this series. Your claim about my argument that this is bad because they removed it, etc. is kind of what it devolves into, is flawed. That's not true. You left out about 25 minutes of the first video, and almost all of the second video with that one. You also claim that the false advertising portions of both videos are unimportant, yet it was so unimportant that that's what this super long comment thread was about, so I don't know, it kinda seems like it's relevant to me. Within your efforts to strawman my argument against MCE being only about comparison, you bring up that the cheats are by your own admission, not discussed for the entire beginning of the video. And that's correct. Even then, there's still about 25 minutes of argument there though, so why bring this up? Just because I don't talk about the cheats right away doesn't mean I don't talk about them. Because I do! It's a really long chapter of the first video, and I'm not even mentioning the second video. You can't just pretend this massive part of my argument doesn't exist. Straw man fallacy. This fallacy is demonstrated by taking your opponent's argument, simplifying it to the point where it has nothing to stand on, and then pushing it over. By disregarding evidence and large chunks of the argument being presented to you, you only make your own argument look weaker, as if your counter couldn't contend with your opponent's argument, so you had to remove some of your opponent's argument to save face. I don't care fallacy. Yet another unofficial fallacy, at least in the logical world. This fallacy is demonstrated when you disregard a portion of or the entirety of an opponent's argument simply because you deem it unimportant or irrelevant in your opinion. In other words, you don't care what your opponent has to say on the topic, so you choose not to acknowledge it, or make a statement about a topic's supposed unimportance without actually addressing the topic or the evidence behind it. By refusing to offer any counter to an opponent's argument, you're basically admitting you don't have any counters, which will lose you at least that portion of the argument. One unexpected defense of MCE appeared quite frequently in the comments. The idea that the game is improved significantly if you play it while under the effects of alcohol. To be clear, many of these comments weren't using this as a defense of MCE, rather they offered this as a suggestion to make it better. And that's fair, but for those comments that did intend for this to be an actual defense of MCE, remember that drinking games are an entire genre of game and MCE does not fall into that category. Additionally, when it comes to family games like MCE, with an age range like this, the developers literally cannot expect or intend for all players to be intoxicated while playing the game. While I see the potential merit of the effects of alcohol being incorporated into this game, in the case of MCE, you are once again adding an outside factor to the game that wasn't intended by the developers. The current state of intoxication amongst players is something the devs of the game cannot account for in a game that wasn't specifically designed around drinking.
When your complaint is that it's not Monopoly enough, I struggle to empathize. Monopoly is probably the worst game to ever exist. Any move away from it is an upgrade, though I would not go anywhere near any kind of Monopoly board.
So, you hate Monopoly. I've gone over this topic because MCE is a spin-off of base Monopoly. I expect there to be a good chunk of similarities with its gameplay. The word Monopoly is on the box. It has a very similar board. As a consumer, I expect some familiar Monopoly gameplay. That's the point I made. You struggle to empathize because to you, Monopoly is the worst game to ever exist. You didn't even explain why you think that. You're just declaring it as fact. If you think Monopoly is probably the worst game to ever exist, you've probably never played Candyland, right? What about LCR? What about What Do You Meme? What about Campaign for North Africa, The Desert War, 1940-43? Like, this list goes on forever. It truly does. You clearly do not know the true evils of the world. Unfortunately for your argument, Hasbro clearly tried to move too far away from the Monopoly formula, and we got MCE. And oh my god, is it so much worse in literally every way. So clearly not every step away from Monopoly is an upgrade. You sure do know how to make hasty generalizations, while also failing to recognize any of the points I made in this video.
The complaint that you can just do whatever, and if someone calls it a cheat, they get punished for false calling because it's not on the board, is really dumb. Because it assumes you can just do whatever without consequence, and the other players will be fine with that. No play table would ever allow that.
What about my table? My table allowed that, as would any table following the rules of this game correctly. We were playing the game rules as written. We were playing in the intended way. Considering there is no built-in consequence for baiting people into calling you out for cheating/fake cheating, even if you haven't, there's no in-game way to prevent this behavior. Sometimes there's no way to prove you even physically did that action. If someone didn't care about winning and just wanted to ruin someone else's day, they could do this. Rules as written. If you have to modify or house rule a game just to make it fair, playable, or fun, then there's definitely something wrong with the design.
The assumption that most people cheat in normal Monopoly is a wild and stupid assumption, and I don't think I'd want to play with you.
I never said most people cheat at normal Monopoly. I said cheating was prevalent. You're more likely to encounter cheating in Monopoly when compared to most games where cheating is less common. Monopoly is known to have its cheaters due to its long history, as well as Hasbro themselves incorporating the idea into their marketing, not to mention this very game. So it makes cheating more common. That doesn't mean I assume most people cheat in it. I love lying and telling lies fallacy. This is another unrecognized fallacy to my knowledge. This is a fallacy demonstrated by lying and telling lies. This is different from the uninformed fallacy because instead of simply stating inaccurate information due to you not knowing or misunderstanding the correct information, you fabricate entirely new or irrelevant information to strengthen your argument. Unfortunately, it never works out because now you're just a liar. I feel like the majority of your complaints are unjustified. You spent the majority of the video giving anecdotal evidence with a cheater, then complained how theoretically people could cheat outside of this game's rules. Just because this game is called Cheaters Edition doesn't mean you can cheat willy-nilly, something you seem to understand but still give flack solely based on the fact that the people you tend to play with are not fun to be around and cheat instead of the allowed cheating in this game's rules. What are you talking about? This isn't accurate at all. I wasn't complaining about that one friend being a cheater because they never were. I was explaining how much of a bad sport they were when it came to losing at base Monopoly. My experience with the game is important when I'm making a 47-minute video reviewing the thing, because I'm the author of the argument. The author context is important. That portion of the video certainly didn't take up half or more of the runtime like you exaggerate either. I didn't talk about my context for 24 minutes. I talked about it for about 6 minutes. And when did I imply you could cheat outside of the game's rules? Of course, if you're playing a game as intended, you can't cheat for real, even with this one. I don't understand what you mean when you say I give it flack, because real cheating is something I never advocate for. The portion of the video where I go over the cheats is just me explaining how they work, and how they can be broken within the game's own logic and rules. That's just how bad the game is designed. No real cheating is required to break it. The people I play with are fun to be around, excluding that one friend who I haven't spoken to in years now. Who are you to make such an assumption? When my friends and I played MCE together, there was no real cheating at all. Why would you assume that there was? Did you even watch the video?
Try again.
Author context is important in argumentative writing. At least I think so. Why should anyone care about what you say if you don't give them context as to why you're even writing the argument in the first place? This is why when people admit they've never played MCE and still insist on writing out counter-arguments, it makes me wonder why they're really writing the comment, you know? Just to spread negativity, perhaps? Just to spite me simply because I actually enjoy base Monopoly and they don't? Who knows? Only they do. There were some commenters who didn't care for the author context segment of the first MCE video, likely because they couldn't find anything wrong with my arguments. They said things like the segment was ultimately pointless and went on for too long. I feel like I've already proven why it wasn't actually pointless, and whether you think it went for too long is a YouTube video format personal preference thing. One thing people loved doing is claiming or exaggerating the author's context segment was so long that it took away from the points in the video, and that the video hardly talked about anything important because of it. Obviously this isn't true. It's more than likely those people didn't care for my video format and simply gave up a few minutes in, thus missing my entire breakdown of MCE. Just to set the record straight, here's a breakdown of the entire first video and its contents. The intro lasts about a minute, then there's about 6 minutes of my author's context. Considering the first video was just over 47 minutes long, that means people who made claims like this skipped or refused to acknowledge 40 whole minutes of the first video. Wow. At about the 8-minute mark, I start talking about my first impressions and the artistic design of the game. At about the 10-minute mark, I get into how MCE removes many beloved features from the original Monopoly, while also making unnecessary, unneeded, and often detrimental changes to other existing mechanics. I talk about that for 12 minutes. Then at about the 22-minute mark, I move on to the cheats themselves. I talk about those for 13 minutes. At the 35-minute mark, I talk about what it was like to actually play the game for 4 minutes. At about the 39-minute mark, I talk about how cheating in Base Monopoly is better for 2 minutes. At about 41 minutes, I talk about the price for about 30 seconds. Then I move on to the Who Was This Made For segment for about another minute. Then I move on to the torture game comparison segment. And finally, at about the 45-minute mark, I start my conclusion. Anyway, when people say things like the personal story in the first video, my author's context, is unimportant and whatnot, just know that they're only referring to about 12% of the actual video, and actively disregarding all of the points I made against MCE just after that segment. I will continue to believe author's context is important, because not only does it give haters something unrelated to the actual arguments being made to whine about, but also because when commenters who write counter-arguments admit they never actually played MCE, I'll know that their context is almost completely irrelevant to their argument, and in rare cases, will trivialize their arguments.
I think the base game of Monopoly is already flawed. It's an extremely unbalanced experience that usually ends with one player being so far ahead that his win is decided, but still everyone has to play for one more hour because nobody goes bankrupt. Also, the tactical decision-making is non-existing. There is pretty much no reason to not buy everything you can in a normal game. Also, trading is annoying, as there is no solid rule for how trades work and how much your opponent has to accept. It becomes to a spite fest. Sometimes your opponent has the one card you really need, and you can offer him things he need, but he just refuses to trade, and that's it.
I'm not sure it's even possible for base Monopoly to be unbalanced, considering every player has equal opportunity or chance to do or land on anything in the game. If one player is far ahead, that's just a sign that they're winning. And if you don't think you have a chance, you can always respectfully concede, unlike what my one friend did. There are tons of strategic and tactical decisions and moves to make in base Monopoly, and I got into more detail on that exact topic in the second video of this duology, so I won't bother repeating myself here. If you don't like the trading system, that's one thing, but that doesn't automatically mean the system is flawed, that's simply your preference.
Speaking as someone who played it quite often, and usually wins, even at times, I knew all prices without looking it up. It often ends in situations like this, so you always need some special rules to fix these issues. One we often do is to allow building houses if you land on your space rather than allowing it always. This might slows it down sometimes, but it avoids someone early having a hotel and getting too far ahead before the game proper starts.
If your preferred method of playing base Monopoly involves adding house rules to aid in your enjoyment of the game, then that's totally fine. Again though, these house rules and supposed flaws with base Monopoly you bring up all seem to be preference-based or a player-based problem. It doesn't really take away from base Monopoly at all, at least not in my eyes.
Try again.
I have played some Monopoly Basic and thought it was fun. Never played Cheaters Edition, but get completely where you are coming from with most of, if not all of your points. The only one I do think where you take your own group and experiences into account as a fact and not opinion on experience is the combination of your points of playing casually and taking things with you when you leave the table. I do agree it's not a good idea to take things with you, and you make fair points. However, people just need to go to the bathroom or take a drink. That's life. A group can easily accept that while someone is away, they don't do anything to that person, or even place the game on hold, including the cheating, for the few minutes, as you cannot take your turn either, so they are going to need to wait anyway somewhere soon. I know that would happen with my friend group without even discussing it first, if I were to ever play this game, which won't happen because it's bad, among other reasons. You very much assume that gentlemen's agreements don't exist at all in this game, which doesn't need to be true. A group can go all out while everyone is there, and not target someone while they are away, just as much as they can agree and trust that people won't misuse this. It's a mutual agreement of trust and respect, especially because people often barely have a choice when they actually need to leave. Also, you could argue that it's unfair that people are away and cannot be targeted by cheats because of that, but the game is full of randomness anyway. Not that there isn't any skill or strategy, but in my view, someone who needs to go to the toilet is just another part of the unfairness and randomness at that point. Only people agree to share that unluckiness, not allowing to cheat, instead of putting it all on that singular person. Either way, something that can be fixed by just pausing the game in its entirety if someone needs to do something. Yes, it makes the game even longer. No, it isn't a good solution, but from my personal experience, I would barely call it a solution, let alone a new rule, as in some groups, this would happen naturally, without prior discussing. Like, again, I get your points, but that argument is just strongly based that not a single form of mutual trust can exist while playing this game, which I personally think and very much expect to be false. Just to end it off, great video. It's a bit of a rant, but that's clearly intentional because of your understandable hatred for this game. I completely agree that going to the bathroom and other necessary activities are indeed just life. And because of that, they're completely unavoidable. MCE clearly didn't take things like that into account during its design process, and it shows. I don't think things like gentlemen's agreements and whatnot can't exist for this game. I'm just making an educated statement that they're quite rare in this case. They also changed the game outside of its intended design, so once you've made one, you're already not playing the game as intended. Consider yourself impressively lucky if you have a group where every single person playing is willing to go against optimal play as well as the vibe, tone, and strategy this game pushes on you, all for the sake of fairness, in a game which is unbelievably unbalanced, while also agreeing on exactly where that line should be drawn for the sake of fairness and fun. If a game was well designed, lines wouldn't need to be drawn in the first place. MCE encourages you to be sneaky, mischievous, and downright cruel as part of the core gameplay, and it incentivizes you with great rewards to use the cheat mechanics as frequently as possible, as well as punish others for their lack of awareness. It is in every player's best interest, both in-game and out, to capitalize on the opportunity presented to them if someone leaves the table. This game actively builds distrust and breeds disrespect, which makes it all the more likely people will use the cheat system to the fullest, especially considering there is no pause rule built into the game, and there most certainly should have been. I do argue in this very video that it is blatantly unfair for specific players to not be targeted by cheats while they're away, simply because it is unfair. There's no way around it. It most certainly is not fair to compare randomness and unfairness and consider them equals as well. If anything, randomness is fairness because it has no bias to any player. The unfair and unbalanced nature of MCE has nothing to do with its random elements. If it did, random elements would likely be much less common in games in general. The random elements in MCE are the same exact ones as in base Monopoly, with the only exception being which 5 cheats are active on the board if you aren't playing Ultimate Cheaters mode. Base Monopoly doesn't have these problems, and has the same randomness, because it doesn't have the cheat system MCE has. MCE contains the actual flaws. I agree with you that leaving the table is one of the many unfair aspects this game can possess. It most certainly is not part of the randomness, but as I said previously, it's not an intentional choice put into the game. It's not a real game mechanic. The problem is that MCE doesn't account for this in its core design. There aren't many games with things like the cheat mechanics built into them for a reason. There are so many physical, real-world, in-person limitations and issues these mechanics bring into play just from existing, and this is just one of them. If you have to alter a game in any way just to make it more fair, enjoyable, or balanced, then it's a bad game, or at the very least, it has undeniable flaws. As I said in this video, I'm not reviewing the house-ruled gentleman's agreement game-pausing alternate ways of play version of MCE you may choose to play. I'm talking about it for what it is. I can't honestly recommend you play MCE, but there are some things about it that you need to experience to understand fully. Forgive me for thinking a game all about gaining an advantage in a sneaky and unfair way would encourage gaining an advantage in a sneaky and unfair way. Admitting to stakelessness tactic. Some people admit when they have no stakes in an argument, and yet choose to argue anyway. This calls into question the legitimacy of their motives for even crafting an argument in the first place. If they don't believe in what they're arguing, or if they supposedly don't have a reason to believe in what they're arguing, then why are they arguing it? In this case, this refers to people who admit to have never played MCE before. If that's the case, then what's your reason for defending it? Obviously, this doesn't automatically invalidate all of their points, but it does make you wonder. It sows doubt. The most common counter of mine that received counters was the whole taking things with you when you have to leave the table argument. In this video, as well as the previous one, I believe I have proven that this tactic is not a tactic at all, and in actuality is an unintended exploit. There is plentiful evidence to suggest this. But let's pretend I haven't countered this argument already for just a moment, because there's a different way of thinking about it that also supports my argument. So, let's say during your game of MCE, you discover that you'd have much better chances of winning if instead of laying all of your properties and money on the table in front of you, like normal Monopoly, you choose to hold all of those components in your hand at all times. It's genius, really. By doing this, you render several of the most powerful cheats either completely impossible or partially impossible, and therefore you have a massive advantage in the game. The other players see your tactic and proceed to do the same. After all, why wouldn't they? They want to win too, or at the very least want a fair game. So now that everyone is using this tactic, what's the point of those cheats that were rendered impossible? The answer is there is no point, because they shouldn't exist. And they wouldn't exist if this tactic was truly intended by the developers, because there would be absolutely no need for them. The same thing applies to the take things with you when you leave the table strategy thing. Because you're introducing an entirely new mechanic that doesn't appear in the rules whatsoever, and that mechanic trivializes existing mechanics, clearly you are not playing the game as intended, and that is not a valid defense for MCE rules as written. Once again, if this way of play is fun for you, I'm not discouraging you from using it, but this is not a defense of MCE, because you effectively aren't playing MCE anymore. How autistic do you gotta be to make 2 near-hour-long videos on a bad board game, lol? I mean, he is neurodivergent enough to not get either the point/joke of the game being against his tryhard I have to win this game for babies mentality, or that his friends probably find him an annoying tryhard, and that's why they side with the other guy, and in force used by him not getting it isn't so serious the rules in a way that caused this dork to make these videos from all the frustration caused by him not getting it isn't so serious, and the ridiculous ways of cheating are the point. To answer the original question first, a little. I feel like this isn't the most autism spectrum thing I've done though, considering I made a hit and roll game with 200 playable characters, and I've spent the last year of my life combining over 900 Uno versions into one game, so all things considered, this, isn't even that big of a deal to me. Anyway, you must love MCE if you're willing to write something like this in a public space. What's really funny is you didn't stop after personally insulting me, and kept going only to say some blatantly false things. By far the most prominent logical fallacy in this comment is ad hominem. You call me neurodivergent in a derogatory manner. You bring up my personal gaming mentality as if everyone isn't allowed to have their own. You call me an Oying, and you call me a dork. If you're ever looking for the fastest way to lose your argument by default, insulting the person you're arguing against 4 times in one sentence, this is all one run-on sentence by the way, is probably one of the best ways to do it. On top of that though, the things you actually argue are completely incorrect. You say the point of the game is to A, not be serious, and B, the ridiculous ways you can cheat. You claim this game goes against being a tryhard. Huh, that's weird. I think I've addressed this point somewhere before. Let me dig through my old MCE scripts. Aha, quote me. Take it from me, a game designer, that you cannot design a game and expect everyone who ever plays it to not play the game in an optimal way. You can't design a game where you expect every single person to ever play it in the history of its existence to not try to win. So the reason I didn't enjoy MCE is because I played optimally, because I tried to win a game in which there is a winner and the game itself places you in direct competition with other players. I had a miserable experience? Is that what is actually being implied by this? If this game was designed to punish players who attempt to use the rules of the game to the fullest, and players who take this game seriously in any capacity, then that's just another reason why this game is terribly designed. This also is another case of people pretending to know the social dynamics of an event they weren't a part of. I understand that everyone's definition of tryharding is different, but half of my friends are gamers, experienced tabletop gamers. Even the non-tabletop gamer friends present were all actively trying to win, at least in the first game of MCE. If you expect nobody playing to try their best to win, believe me, if you try to make a game with that concept in mind, it will fail. One of the many reasons I'm choosing to judge MCE so harshly is because it was made by the 3rd largest toy and game company in the world, and they should know that people want to win games, so they would never design a game with the opposite in mind. Just as I thought, I have already covered this topic. It's almost as if you didn't watch the video and left this comment anyway. You also say that this game is meant for babies when it isn't. In fact, I think I addressed this previously as well. Quote me, "Isn't this game made for kids?" No, it's made for everyone 8 and up. It's right there on the front of the box. It's a family game, meant for families. I'm judging this as a game that almost anyone is meant to play, because that's what it is. This game is not advertised as a version of Monopoly meant for younger people, and this is provable because the Monopoly Junior line exists, and that series of game is meant for kids, or teaching kids about regular Monopoly. Even if this game was made purely for kids, this is likely not the thing you'd want to teach them. How peculiar! That's 2 topics I covered previously that you assume I've never addressed. I think that's enough evidence to say that you didn't even watch the video you commented on, or at the very least, you didn't pay attention. And apparently my friends probably think I'm annoying. You do not have the necessary info to make that call, and it's also not true. And on top of all of that, you're lying about the content of the video because you claim my friends side with the other guy. I don't remember that happening. Probably because it didn't happen. But how would I know? I'm only a primary source for my own personal experiences. Is there anywhere at all where this game is advertised as or said to be a game where you, as a player, aren't allowed to take it seriously? No, obviously not. It's a game that's designed around its rules and mechanics. Players have the freedom to take this game as seriously as they want as long as they stay within the game's rule set, and that's almost always the game developer's intention with any game. It's not the game's job to police how seriously the players should take it, because something like that would be literally impossible to do. It's a player's freedom to play the game within its rules however they want. The only issues I have here is it seems like most people everyone seems to play with are incredibly childish or immature. I get the argument of you could leave the table with a trusting group and abuse it, but we're sitting down to play a game. I assume we all understand the game and expect we won't be abusing out-of-game stuff to influence the game. If your group has that kind of issue, you might need a better group. Also, defending cheating is fun because it's exciting when it's against the rules? Huh? Maybe it's just me, but I play a game because I like the rules of the game. If I felt I needed to break those rules, then I'd just not play that game. Also, just a counterpoint about the game specific. I've never played it, but I am assuming people call it a social deduction because they are playing properly, intentionally distracting friends to set up a situation where a steal could happen. Then it's up to that person to figure out if it did or didn't happen and take the punishment. Now, I do think the reward and punishment is way too powerful in this game, but I get why they would say it's social deduction. So I'd say many arguments present here are fair, but some sound like you haven't fully considered how other people might be seeing the game or their groups. I wouldn't consider looking for an optimal strategy immature or childish. Because the entire game revolves around being mischievous, theft, and kicking your opponents while they're down, it only makes sense for players to use the full extent of the game mechanics to their advantage. Once again, people want to win games. I would consider you fortunate or lucky if you're able to find a group where all players are willing to not play optimally just for the sake of the game being balanced or enjoyable. If you have to hold back when you're playing a game, something is clearly wrong with the design. That next argument you mentioned was from the perspective of someone who actually does cheat in games. Not me, but some commenters from the first video of this duology. Obviously someone like you or me, who doesn't enjoy cheating in games, wouldn't have this perspective. But I heard what people who cheat said, and it makes sense. Even real cheaters hate this game. If you've never played MCE before, I'm not sure how you can agree with the MCE is a social deduction game thing. I have played the game by its own rules, to the T. How have I not played the game properly? How is it that people who played it differently than what's written in the rules can play it more properly than me? Regardless, MCE is factually not a social deduction game. Distracting players and sleight of hand does not make MCE a social deduction game. If you get stolen from, you either have to randomly guess who stole what from you, or you already know who stole what from you because they were bad at being sneaky. There's absolutely nothing mechanically implemented to help you deduce what has been stolen from you or who stole it. There's effectively no real deduction to be done. This really shouldn't even be an argument because of how factual it is. Absolutely nothing about this game is an indicator of it being a social deduction game. It's more likely people who said this either didn't fully know the rules of MCE or didn't fully know what makes a social deduction game a social deduction game. I've probably thought about this game more than some of the developers at Hasbro did when they created it. I've covered it from all angles. No matter who you are, no matter who you play with, no matter what, this game is terribly designed and will almost always offer a horrid experience to those who play it. I've already talked about that in this video and the first one though, so I won't repeat myself. I don't disagree that it's a terribly designed game, I'm just saying I don't agree with those specific points. I disagree with the optimal idea. Again, I think most common board game players understand there is at-the-table gameplay and other things you have to do. If we were playing Magic the Gathering and you had a card that let you see my hand or pick a random card out of my hand, you wouldn't just do it while I wasn't there. I get the idea of being underhanded in a game about being underhanded, but I think there is a reasonable line a group would have, and if they can't respect that line, I wouldn't play board games with them. I guess I also have an issue with the argument that losing can't be fun, or as fun as winning. Most games are 4 players. 3 of those players are going to lose. If the competition in the game isn't fun, to where losing is also enjoyable, then you are playing for the wrong reason. Most popular board games are popular because losing is also fun. Betrayal at House on the Hill is a good example. The worst endgame events are the ones where losing isn't fun. The best events are where even if you lose, it was at least a close game and really fun. Honestly, I don't really care what cheaters think because it's kinda pathetic to cheat in a competitive game. It's like if we're playing chess and you double move a pawn when you can't, but someone didn't notice or did a strange knight move. It shouldn't be on your opponent to police you constantly. It's just annoying, taxing, and anyone with self-respect would just stop playing with you. So to me, people who are so desperate to beat their friends that they have to resort to cheating just don't have a valid opinion. Lastly, I agree, I haven't played the game, but I am saying that I could see how people could call it social deduction. I didn't say it was good social deduction, just that I could believe people think it is. Coup gives you very little information when you get down to 2 players, but it's still a social deduction game. You don't know if I'm a courtesan, and do you really want to lose a life to call me out? The only info you would have is the 2 cards in your hand, or 1 if you're already down a life, which in this game, the info would be how much money you have, your properties, etc. Do I think it's thrilling or great social deduction? No, but I think it technically fits into the frame of social deduction where a player has to trick you into believing them if they stole from you during the turn, and avoid being called out. Like I said, I'm not arguing it's a good or well-designed game, I'm just saying some of your points seem unconvincing. Once again, if you have to brew house rules and hold yourself back just to make the game more fair, balanced, enjoyable, then clearly something is wrong. I get it. In a perfect world, nobody would willingly do something that fundamentally breaks the game they're currently playing. And like I said, you're lucky if you can find an entire group who can agree on exactly where the line goes. The fact that you even have to draw a line is the issue. If the game had more thought put into it, then maybe a line wouldn't have been necessary. And that's the way it should be. Even if you have found the perfect group of players who are all willing to reduce their own chance of winning and their strategy just to play the game in a way that's fair, not everyone who plays this game will have that luxury. It's the mere fact that these actions can be done at all that breaks this game. That's my criticism and the point I'm trying to make. Other games like Magic the Gathering don't have this problem because they aren't themed around theft and don't create paranoia. They're not about sleight of hand or being a criminal, etc. In MCE, on the other hand, these traits are directly encouraged by not only the theme, but the gameplay. Not to mention the optimal win strategy. If Hasbro had simply put a one-line clause in the rules that said something like, if a player has to leave the table, the game is paused, no cheating, then this wouldn't be an issue at all. But they didn't have the forethought to do this, and the result is garbage. I never said that losing couldn't be fun, so I don't know where you got that idea from. I said that when people play games, they try to win. People play games to win them. Games should absolutely be designed to be fun all throughout, even if you lose at the end. MCE is miserable throughout, though, in my opinion. Regardless, my point is if you aren't playing a game in hopes of winning, then what are you even doing? Are you playing the game to lose? No, obviously not. If you aren't putting in some effort towards winning, then you aren't really playing the game. Games are designed to be won. This is a fundamental of game design. I understand not respecting people who cheat for real in tabletop games. Obviously, it's not the intended way to play the game, and it gives them an unfair advantage, etc. But if there was any game where having a cheater's opinion would be a good perspective, Monopoly Cheaters Edition would be that game. On paper, this game was quite literally designed for them after all. This game wanted to give cheaters the feeling of cheating without actually cheating by building mischievous acts into the actual gameplay. Funnily enough, according to cheaters, Hasbro failed to do this. This argument isn't about whether cheating in games is acceptable or respectful or not, it's about hearing the unique perspective of a cheater on a game that was built with cheaters in mind. I believe that having all sides of the story is valuable when crafting an argument, and it logically makes sense for me to include that segment in the video. Considering the subject matter, it's clear that both you and I don't have that perspective, so it's even more important for us to hear it. If you want to throw away a point against this game just because you don't like it, I can't stop you, but that doesn't mean it no longer exists. I genuinely don't understand how you can think MCE is a social deduction game when it so clearly is not. You bring up Coup, which is a very good example of a real social deduction game. In fact, it's such a social deduction game that one of its official genre descriptions is social deduction. MCE, on the other hand, was never advertised as a social deduction game, nor was it designed to be one. You say that Coup gives you very little information when you get down to 2 players, but that's assuming you're playing the game with only 2 players, or that the other several players haven't been eliminated from the game already. Clearly, the game is a social deduction game all the way through, and just because it got down to 2 players doesn't change that. Even with only 2 players, you admit that you actually have information that can help you deduce what the other player has. You have the cards in your hand. That is an intentionally designed social deduction mechanic. The only way to find out if you're right in your actual thought-out deduction is by putting your own game at risk, making any additional info you can gather all the more valuable. Every action that other player takes can potentially give you more information on what cards they have, giving you an advantage. MCE has absolutely nothing like this. You say the amount of money you have and the properties you own are the equivalent to Coup's core gameplay, which is simply not the case at all? Yes, you'll almost definitely know when you've been stolen from, because your properties or money will be missing, but you need to understand that from there are no mechanics in place to help you deduce who took your stuff. Bluffing is not a social deduction mechanic, it's social deception. A he said, she said argument is not a social deduction mechanic. Everyone's word is equally worthless because they're all playing the game to win, and you taking the punishment for wrongful accusations only benefits them. If you get stolen from, there is no evidence you can use to save yourself. Therefore, there is nothing to actually deduce. Take it from me, as someone who has actually made their own social deduction game, that MCE is most certainly not one. If you still think my arguments are unconvincing, I recommend giving MCE a try. It'll become very clear very quickly, I assure you.
Ew, disgusting ads. Yuck, yuck.
Ad hominem non-author. This is the same as ad hominem, except instead of attacking the author they're trying to counter, they attack someone else or a group of people who aren't even involved in the argument. Lying and bluffing being part of a game doesn't automatically make it a social deduction game. That's just a fact. I can understand wanting to change MCE to be a social deduction game, but in order to do that, you'd have to introduce a mechanic that requires real deduction. I'm sorry. I'm 11 minutes into this video, and I just can't take it anymore. This is the worst review of something I've ever seen. I don't even know if you've got bad takes about the game because you just refuse to talk about the game. You spend all your time ranting about your friends, and when you finally start to graze the actual subject matter, you still miss. Because all you've clearly said 11 minutes in is that you don't like how your friends play Monopoly, and that this Monopoly game has different rules, so it's not even Monopoly. Which is a ridiculous take, because you had the box. You acknowledge that on the box it promises new rules and features, and you are upset by that? This was dumb. If this is truly the worst review of anything you've ever seen, that is simply your preference. You didn't even watch the entire video though, so anything you say could hardly be classified as a fair ranking or assessment. You knew the video was going to be long when you clicked on it. I go in depth in essentially every aspect and topic in this video, and that includes my author's context. You say I refuse to talk about the game, but that's a blatant lie. In this case, you don't even know that you're lying though, because you haven't watched the video. You say I spend all of my time talking about my friends, but that's not true either. Only about 6 minutes are spent on my author's context segment, and that's more than a fair portion considering this video's length. I'm a firm believer that author's context is an important part of any argumentative or critical work. If you aren't willing to hear that, just skip ahead in the video, or just leave the video once you realize my format isn't for you. You claim that once I get into my "This is not Monopoly" segment, I still miss, but you don't even know the full point I'm trying to make with those comparisons because you didn't stick around for the end of that segment. You also completely disregard my opening point in that segment, which you would have seen if you truly did stick around for 11 minutes as you claim. If you were curious about my actual point instead of making assumptions, I'm not upset about MCE having different mechanics from base Monopoly like you claim. I'm actually upset about the game being a Monopoly spin-off in the first place, since the gameplay is so far removed from base Monopoly and feels nothing like Monopoly when you actually play it. By calling the game a Monopoly game, it borders on false advertising. Like I said, as a consumer, you would expect any game with Monopoly in the title, spin-off or not, to at least resemble Monopoly in some way in its gameplay, but MCE completely changes the formula, and the new formula it uses is a broken mess on top of it all. You'd know this stuff if you didn't just assume the worst and leave a nasty comment.
Cheaters Edition isn't meant to be a serious game. It encourages you to cheat, then gloat about it with your friends.
You're absolutely right about one thing. MCE most certainly encourages you to cheat, and forces you to gloat if you successfully perform a cheat. Not sure what you mean by MCE isn't meant to be a serious game, though. Like any game, its rules are meant to be taken seriously, even though in this case it's incredibly difficult to do so considering how poorly this game was designed. Either way, players can choose to play this game as seriously or as casually as they like, similar to most other existing games. Unfortunately for anyone playing MCE, it punishes both competitive and casual gameplay to such an extreme degree that neither playstyle is anywhere near viable, or in my opinion, enjoyable. It's an incredibly flawed experience from essentially every angle, unfortunately.
It's a party game. It's not meant to be taken seriously, so of course a board game snob won't like it.
Ah, I see. Well, unfortunately for you, you've made it abundantly clear you didn't actually watch the second MCE video where I covered the seriousness topic in detail, even though you left a comment on the second video before you wrote this new one, and then not even 30 minutes later left this eerily similar comment on this video. I'd recommend actually understanding my arguments before you plan to counter them, because throwing insults at me doesn't actually strengthen your argument, it only weakens it. In fact, if you're going to counter anything I'm saying, I'd recommend actually developing a counter-argument to begin with, because you seem to have no evidence or data backing you up. Have you even played MCE? Or alternatively, do you enjoy MCE but can't think of any counters to any of my arguments? Not sure why else you would go out of your way to insult me. But hey, if you don't trust my opinion of the game, feel free to browse the comment section on both videos in this series and see for yourself how the overwhelming majority of people agree with my stance. Those are actual numbers and data. And just to clarify, MCE is most certainly not a party game. In all fairness, course, the party game genre is one of the most broad and loose genres of game, but generally speaking it maintains some similar characteristics across games, and MCE possesses none of those common characteristics. In fact, if you look at the Wikipedia page for party game, it even specifically states that elimination-style games, like both Base Monopoly and MCE, make for poor party games. The antithesis of party games, if you will. Regardless, MCE never advertises itself as a party game, I've never seen it described as one until you wrote your comment, and generally it isn't considered to be one. None of this even matters anyway, because party games can be taken just as seriously as any other game in any other genre. A game cannot define how seriously players play it.
Yeah, it's clearly not meant to be taken seriously. That's why the game ends once all properties are bought, and how you can literally win the game by stealing all the 500s. See Smosh videos playing this game. I don't care what Wikipedia or what any of the other snobs say. It's a party game in my opinion.
I see you're going for the ignore everything he says approach to forming a counter-argument. Just because you choose to ignore my thought-out response doesn't mean it disappears, my dude. Regardless, it appears you actually care about this topic quite a lot, considering you not only clicked on multiple long video essays about the topic, but also left 3 total comments so far on those videos. 3! In the over 800,000 views I've received on my Monopoly videos, there have only been between 4,000 and 5,000 comments from other users, which means you fall into a small group of people that makes up about 0.006% of total viewers who cared enough to leave a comment, and you left 3 comments. Perhaps you care more than you're letting on. These examples you bring up don't support your new angle to your argument either. Enlighten me, how does MCE ending once all properties have been bought relate to its serious factor in any way? What about this mechanic prompts players to take the game less seriously? The stealing money thing that Smosh did is in actuality a game-breaking exploit, and only further strengthens my argument that MCE was poorly designed. I actually talk about this very topic in the second MCE video I did, so you've provided even more evidence that you didn't even watch the video. Do you know what arguments you're trying to counter? Regardless, even if you were to play MCE as casually as possible, a game-breaking exploit will simply ruin the game all by itself. It doesn't matter how you choose to play. If a game is broken, it's broken. On top of all of that though, why is it that you believe supposedly purely casual games are exempt from criticism? They aren't. Not to mention, this isn't a purely casual game, and no amount of playing casually will remove the factually present game design flaws in MCE. Multiple infinite money exploits, ableist game components, rules that trivialize other rules, lack of playtesting and the consequences revealing themselves in seemingly incomplete rules. That doesn't disappear, no matter how casually you play. Fun fact, you're completely allowed to have an opinion. If you had simply said that MCE was a party game in your opinion from the beginning, there would be no issue there. Instead, you chose to state it as a fact and used that made-up fact as the backbone of your entire argument. And once again, you didn't even bother addressing my counterpoint. If you're going to use an opinion to build a counter-argument, the least you can do is acknowledge the opinions and facts of those you're trying to counter. No amount of not caring will win you this debate. Blindfolded claims tactic. This is demonstrated when you claim to be able to form counter-arguments without even knowing what the original argument is, or attempt to counter-arguments without knowing what the original argument is. New argument counter tactic. This tactic is demonstrated when you create new topics of argument and possibly claim they're more important than the real current argument, rather than addressing the real current argument directly. Did you know the best way to hate a video on YouTube is to leave a dislike and never interact with the video again? Watching the video and leaving comments only drives engagement, regardless of what you actually say in your comment. So if if you truly just have a grudge against me or my arguments, but can't accept the facts or form logical and constructive arguments against my arguments, the best thing you can do in your situation is dislike the video and not leave a comment. You're welcome. I would be less glib about your responses if I am going to try and blow off, "It's not a game about social deduction because it has other mechanics." What does glib mean? I need to look this up. Fluent and voluble, but insincere and shallow. Ah, so this was actually meant to be derogatory. This is an incredible start. You do know that games can have more than one mechanic. I suppose Clank isn't a deck builder game because it has a board you move around and collect things on. There is an element of dude chill that I think needs to be associated with this game. You definitely come off as a tryhard with questions like, how am I supposed to play it? Well, have you ever tried doing what the game said? Make a plan on your turn and try to accomplish one of the cheats and keep your eyes peeled? I don't own the game and have only ever seen it played, but I found the rules to check and sure enough, it says in the rules that the group officiates who gets punished when someone declares cheat. That means it is in the rule, whatever your group decides to use becomes the rules of the game by the rules of the game, dude. You can hate it, but those are the rules of the game. But you asked for what ways you should have played it. I would have noted that the rule doesn't say someone must take the penalty. That means it's not one or the other, it could be no one take the penalty. But I think the issue is different. I think you just had friends let one of you bully the others into things and likely made the game miserable. But I would definitely take a chill pill on calling games with elements about deductions and caring people not social deduction games just because it has other elements. If you can't see that, I am gonna guess the games you make are pretty standard and uninspired. This is just a personal recommendation, but when developing a counter-argument, I wouldn't recommend calling your opposition glib in the very first sentence. I have no choice but to take it as an insult considering its definition, as well as what you said in the rest of your comment. Ad hominem completely derails arguments before they even begin. Regardless, I'll address your counter-arguments properly. In your first point, you claim that I argue MCE isn't a social deduction game because it has other mechanics, when this is far from the truth, and far from any actual quote present in the video, so please don't misquote me. My actual argument is that MCE doesn't contain any mechanics that would allow for it to be classified as a social deduction game. This is simply because it doesn't contain any, therefore it cannot be classified as a social deduction game. Not to mention the fact it's never advertised as one, and no major sources or reviews of the game refer to it as one. It seems only people who are unaware of MCE's rules, or are unaware of what social deduction games actually are, claim that MCE is a social deduction game, when in reality that claim has no ground to stand on. Since you are claiming you have read the rules of MCE, I'm sure you'd be aware of any mechanics present within that would justify MCE's classification as a social deduction game, so feel free to let me know what mechanics are present when you find them. Of course I am aware that games have multiple mechanics, there's no need to insult my intelligence, especially considering the many mechanics I cover on a single game in this very video. Clank is indeed a deck building game, and the reason it is only serves to support my argument. Clank is a deck building game because players receive decks of cards and throughout the game they build up those decks to make them more powerful or beneficial to their gameplay. This is what makes deck builders deck builders. Of course, it has a board among many other additional components, but those play no part in making Clank a deck builder. It is the mere existence of the actual deck building mechanics present in Clank that allows it to be classified as a deck builder. If the deck building mechanics weren't there, then I'd obviously have a hard time calling Clank a deck builder, because at that point only the board and the other miscellaneous mechanics would be left. Not to mention the full name of Clank is Clank, a deck building adventure, meaning unlike MCE, Clank directly advertises itself as a deck builder. This same logic is what I applied to MCE. Because MCE factually has no social deduction mechanics, it cannot be classified as a social deduction game. In your second point, you claim that there is an element of dude chill that I think needs to be associated with this game. And indeed, that is what you think, meaning it is a matter of your opinion. The implication that you're willing to play MCE suboptimally just for the sake of the game being more enjoyable does not mean this willingness automatically must apply to all who choose to play MCE. There is no precedent set for how seriously or casually anyone chooses to play any game, and it's futile to police such an undefinable concept. Regardless, that's not even what the specific point of the video was about. The point of the video where I say, how would you suggest I play the game differently, is once again related to people's claims that MCE is a social deduction game, when it so clearly isn't. You have quite literally taken my words out of context. My argument during that portion of the video was that I was playing MCE rules as written, so there was no way I could have been improperly playing the game like the MCE is a social deduction game defenders would argue. My counter leads right into your third point, where you ask, have you tried doing what the game said, make a plan on your turn and try to accomplish one of the cheats, and keep your eyes peeled? And my answer to that is yes. I have, in fact, played MCE rules as written. You'd know this if you actually paid attention during the video. This leads me to question your motives for writing out your comment, considering you admit you've never played the game yourself. I'm likely more familiar with the rules of MCE than some of the developers who made it, considering how many different topics I've covered in these videos. I may be wrong, but is it your intention to prove I may be playing MCE incorrectly by referring to the rules and contradicting my arguments that way? If not for this reason, I'm not sure why you'd go through the effort of bringing up the actual rules of MCE, especially since the arguments you make here are completely based on false evidence. You claim that it says in the rules that the group officiates who gets punished when someone declares cheat. That means that it is the rule whatever your group decides to use becomes the rules of the game by the rules of the game, dude. I would have noted that the rules doesn't say someone must take the penalty. That means it's not one or the other, it could be no one take the penalty. This is completely false, and so easily proven false as well, considering the rules for MCE are available for free online on Hasbro's official website. While it is true that any potential cheat can end up with a group decision, this only takes effect if A, you're innocent of cheating, B, you're accused of cheating falsely, and C, you are unable to prove your own innocence. This is a rather specific scenario when compared to your broad claim that this takes effect whenever someone declares cheat. There are very clearly many different cheating scenarios that can occur where no group decision takes place. On top of that, to quote the rules of MCE from the very same paragraph, if you can't prove that you're innocent, the other players must decide if you cheated and who deserves penalty. It even uses the word must. This quote from the rules spells it out plain as day. If you're accused of cheating and can't prove your innocence, the other players must decide if you cheated and who deserves penalty. This means a penalty is always decided on and issued during this scenario. There is no ambiguity here. The rules never mention the secret forbidden third option of not choosing any player to penalize. Either you are misunderstanding the rules which you claim you read, or you're lying about easily located evidence. This entire portion does nothing to aid your argument, especially considering I'm not entirely certain what point you were trying to make with this false statement. And for your final point, you make assumptions about a social situation you weren't a part of. Something I pointed out in this very video does nothing to help your argument. When it comes to taking a chill pill, I refuse to do so when it comes to debunking misinformation being spread on the internet about my content, like the abundance of false information found in your comment, and ensuring people are informed of things that are undeniable facts, especially when it involves this relevant topic I chose to discuss publicly. As for your argument, I have completely debunked it, so if you aren't willing to digest that information I've presented, then there's nothing I can do to help you. Thanks for insulting my games, by the way. It's yet another example of you making claims without any evidence.
stinks!
There were a few comments that brought up how they thought I was a tryhard, and that's why MCE wasn't as enjoyable for me, despite the fact I played the game about as normally as you could the first time around. I don't think people quite realize how high the bar is when it comes to tryharding in this game, so allow me to tell you the truly optimal strategy for a true fun-hating tryhard. At the start of the game, I make a note of how much money and hotels are in the bank, and how much money each player starts with. Whenever money is exchanged between players or the bank, I personally count the money in the bank and the applicable player's stashes before I allow the turn to proceed further. If there's a discrepancy, I call it out, guaranteeing myself the benefit for catching someone cheating. Should someone choose to withhold information from me about a property card, I ensure to take pictures of every property card at the start of the game as well. I start not just my turn, but everyone's turn by forcing everyone to wait while I use my phone to take pictures of everyone's properties, money, and the board. The rules don't say anything about not taking pictures, and using them is just an extension of my memory, so I have the argument ready that it's all information that was made available to me regardless. It's not my fault I don't have a flawless memory. Before anyone starts their current turn by rolling the dice, I cross-reference all of my pictures with that of the previous turn. If there are any discrepancies with property ownership, hotels, etc., I call them out in that moment. Because I have pictures and a note of how much money everyone is supposed to have, I don't bother watching for sleight of hand tricks. Instead, I keep my eyes on the board while others take their turn. My first priority is if anyone is wearing the handcuff, I simply don't take my eyes off their hand for even a second. The instant they try to escape the handcuff, I call them out. If nobody is wearing the handcuff, I simply pay attention to my own things in the off chance someone is foolish enough to steal it. Whenever rent is being collected, I personally ensure the correct person is collecting rent. Whenever anyone moves their piece, I personally ensure the correct amount of spaces are moved. As for cheating myself, there will likely be no need or reason for me to do so. The constant stream of rewards for catching others cheating will be more than enough reward to ensure my victory, and should nobody choose to cheat due to my strategies, then the playing field will be completely leveled. The best case scenario is the other players conceding due to my obnoxious and time-consuming try-hard strategies, resulting in me winning by default. Yeah, I didn't do any of that stuff when I played the game. I just played the game normally, as intended. If only this game was better. And now, for the final case of the video. Interesting. As someone who never played MCE but found a lot of your criticism in the first to be in ill faith, mostly because I hate OG Monopoly, I kinda just want to see the counters you've made and see what I can argue against. I'm gonna category by category since I'm on mobile and don't want to try and keep track of 1 or 2 points per category over an hour of watching. So in this first sentence they admit they've never played MCE before. And before I even have the chance to wonder why they're even bothering to make an argument, they say they found a lot of the criticism in my first video to be in ill faith. To say something in ill faith is to say something with dishonesty, so to make the first sentence they wrote more clear, they say, "I've never played MCE before, but I hate base Monopoly, and therefore I think your criticisms of MCE from the first video were dishonest." What a broken piece of logic. There's quite literally no correlation there. What about your preferences has anything to do with the points I made in the first video? And because you don't like base Monopoly, I'm being dishonest about how bad MCE is? What? And then they do something which I'm pretty sure nobody has ever done. They are so confident they can counter my counter-arguments, they claim they can debunk at least one from each category, considering they want to go through all of them, and they don't even know what my counter-arguments are. Surely they can't be serious. For all they know, they could agree with my arguments, but they haven't even taken the time to know them. This person is out for blood, but they don't even know whose. By all means. To start with category 1, playing too optimally can be an absolute valid reason to ruin your fun. Take Among Us. If I am a crewman and I order everyone to just stick by each other but not too close till we finish our tasks, that is going to be a boring as hell game. To say that a game on a whole is complete trash because competitive play is lacking is folly. Half point. I am only bringing up because you brought up how mad you were about how comments handled your social situation. I'm only going to address you saying I did what was best in that situation to what I said to the 27-year-old who was dating someone half his age who let emotionally manipulate him when he said the same thing. In the infinite number of choices you could have made, you clearly have up somewhere and didn't get the best result. Category 2. Nothing of note here, you just make fun of hilarious stupid claims. Category 3 has no right to exist. It is just going over things you said in the first video with less depth than there. Category 4. To go over the point of just picking up stuff, to you explaining why the exact strategy wouldn't work, to thinking about other ways you could do something similar, which would naturally lead to other players thinking of something to counter that, which just spirals into a huge level of depth that could be fun for people who love problem solving. This is a run-on sentence. Anyways, game state with no counters, unfun. Lots of depth is tons of fun. You made it unclear which is the result you talk about in this one particular instance. God, why are so many things in this video repeated? It could have easily been cut in half. Assuming that the speed changes happen because of bad faith assumptions in a video that gets angry at comments for having bad faith replies about you is jarring whiplash. I'm sorry, what was the reasoning you thought I was making a video in ill faith again? Kinda sad with this video. I get that your arguments that the cheats are stupid and groundbreaking are pretty rock-solid arguments that don't have good counters for them, but I was kinda hoping you would address more reasonable arguments, like saying MCE should be more like the OG and to not be is going against what someone buying it would is an unreasonable argument, since if you ignore reskins of OG, a lot of Monopoly games fundamentally shake up the entirety of how the game is played, or about how if you could stand up and walk away from the game and resume at any time, the game probably isn't that engaging, so making the game need that attention is actually good game design. I just wish actual points worth talking about that involve the game design beyond, oh yeah, these mechanics need a massive fine-tuning session, would be more enjoyable. Wow. If it's a response you want, then I shall provide one, I suppose. A quote I've seen quite a bit in the comments of this second MCE video says, "Players will find a way to optimize the fun out of your game," or something along those lines. And it's true. Prepping your game for players to optimize it is part of the game development process. By looking at how MCE functions, it's clear that no thought was put into preventing the optimal strategy from dominating. The fact that there are any infinite money exploits in the game, let alone 2 or 3, is the only proof needed to show that. Games are meant to be designed around players using the optimal strategy, and those that aren't are going to have obvious flaws, much like MCE does. A game cannot be designed around expecting all players to not play optimally. That idea is absurd and impossible to account for. Comparing MCE to a game like Among Us in this respect is most definitely not a fair comparison either. For one, Among Us is not even a physical tabletop game, it's on a completely different platform with different design philosophies, and on top of that, it isn't even in the same game genre as MCE. And unlike MCE, Among Us has mechanical game design aspects in place that actually attempt to address the situation you're fabricating, things like emergencies and other map gimmicks. Regardless, I'm highly doubtful that everyone you're playing with would be on board with your plan for long anyway, resulting in it ultimately failing. I've played Among Us, I know how trying to fully optimize it goes. With MCE, you don't even have to try very hard to break the game open completely. Games can be designed for casual experiences and not really have a competitive side to them, but this game, MCE, was designed as sort of a middle ground between competitive and casual, just like the original Monopoly. Unfortunately, it fails miserably at being both, not because it doesn't cater to strictly competitive players, but because it's completely broken and unbalanced. When you say, to say that a game on a whole is complete trash because competitive play is lacking is folly, you act as if there aren't dozens of other reasons why MCE is trash that I have clearly presented. Regardless, you must understand that MCE is a multiplayer non-cooperative game, meaning it is by definition a competition or a competitive game. Even if this game were to be directly labeled as a casual game, due to the way it's structured, it still puts players in direct competition, and if you aren't playing the game with the intention to win, then you aren't playing the game as intended. To say that a game is structured in this way is built purely for a hypothetical casual experience is what's truly folly. A good game would still be functional and likely fun if it was actually designed well, regardless of how people choose to play it within its own rules. Anyway, what you said after that did, in fact, upset me. You have absolutely no context clues about the situation or dynamics of what occurred, and you imply that it is actually me who is at fault for that one friend's clearly toxic behavior. I've lost all respect for your argument at this point, as would anyone looking to actually have a productive debate. You even went further and did one of the goofiest things I've ever seen in an argumentative setting. In order to counterpoint a social situation which you know nearly nothing about and had nothing to do with the actual arguments made in the video, you decided to give me unwanted advice in the form of comparing my situation to one of your personal experiences. A situation which I have absolutely no context for, and therefore bears no weight. Just like how my personal experience should have no weight in your argument. You have forcibly inserted your own no-context story into this argument for the sole purpose of telling me how much I messed up at some point in my life? This is truly one of the most absurd things I've ever heard. Are my points in category 2 a bit silly? Mostly, but not to everyone. People actually wrote stuff like that, and it seems like you're choosing to ignore the analyses I did in that section. Seeing as you're a Monopoly hater, I was expecting more anti-Monopoly counterpoints. It seems like your overconfidence has caught up with you. There's nothing for me to counter here in this portion of your argument. Moving on to category 3, I now realize you didn't even bother watching the first video, considering I covered none of those points in the first video, which is the reason I even chose to include them there in the first place. That's the entire point of the category. It really throws your entire argument into jeopardy. Should I even bother saying this much if you didn't even bother watching the first video? Maybe you didn't pay attention to this video either. How am I to know? Category 4. So you're telling me that the solution to a game-breaking tactic that clearly wasn't intended by the developers of the game is to simply continue breaking the game in more and more ludicrous ways? You're not even playing MCE at that point. What are you defending? I can say that I have this really fun tactic in Uno, where I take out a match and burn all of the cards in my hand, thus making me the winner, because I have no cards. But that's not how the game is supposed to be played. Just because a rulebook doesn't account for every ludicrous thing people could physically do with the game components, doesn't mean you're allowed to do them in the context of the game, or that they were fully intended by the developers. MCE isn't broken because it fails to state you can't take stuff with you wherever you go. It's broken because of its core design. This depth you speak of is completely artificial and far from intended design. You're essentially playing your own little game in your head, and that game isn't even MCE. Regardless, this artificial depth you're creating yourself is nowhere within the rules of MCE or its intended design. And if you choose to play this way, sure, it may be fun for you, but what you're experiencing is too separated from what MCE actually is to call this a defense of MCE. You're absolutely right about one thing. The runtime of my MCE ramblings could absolutely be cut in half. I recommend actually watching the first video, because that's really all you need, considering the second video functioned more like a follow-up Q&A. Boom, time investment more than halved. You're welcome. Glad we can agree the cheats are stupid. You got at least 1 point out of these videos. It seems you've actually completely missed the point of the second video though. The video was all about directly responding to comments from the previous videos, and since nobody addressed any of the reasonable arguments you bring up, I didn't cover them. So allow me to cover them right now. It seems you completely misunderstood or straight up didn't hear my argument against your first point present in these videos, so I'll clarify. You claim that because many Monopoly versions change or add new mechanics to the formula, that the consumer should expect there to be drastic changes with a spin-off version of Monopoly. This logic is sound, but you're using it to counter my arguments about the existing mechanics that were completely changed or removed from MCE. My point was not, I miss the original, I want the original, wah wah wah. If I wanted to play the original, I would play the original. Of course, a spin-off game is going to be different, and I expect as such. The actual problem here is that every single mechanic that returns from base Monopoly is trivialized by the new mechanics, resulting in an experience that is most certainly different, but it's also most certainly nothing like Monopoly. This is why I talked in this video about how if this game weren't a Monopoly game and was instead a standalone experience, then a lot of my problems with the game would disappear. When a game is branded as a Monopoly spin-off game, the least it can do is integrate literally any mechanic from the original as part of the practical gameplay. Unfortunately, MCE fails in this respect. As for your second reasonable argument, you claim that the attention-seeking, stressful nature of MCE was not only intended, but that it's actually good game design, and its purpose was to keep people from leaving the table. Leaving the table is not an intended game mechanic. The game was not built with people getting up and leaving mid-game in mind. Games rarely ever are. You've described a hostage situation between game and player as being part of the intended game design and something that is meant to be strategized over, or in your case, meant to encourage breaking the game even more. Regardless, in MCE, people don't need a reason to not leave the table, considering cheating is a built-in feature of the game. Everyone knows that everyone is going to be sneaky and stealing junk. A hostage situation is never a good situation. Of course, leaving the table isn't engaging, but it's also not part of the game and can't be controlled by any game mechanic. Even though MCE attempts to, you can't account for people using the bathroom as part of your game design, especially if they're only punished for doing so. Anyway, I'm not sure what you want from me when you say you would have rather seen me cover more points worth talking about when I've covered essentially everything there is about the game at this point. It's almost as if you're attempting to speedrun your way into a third video. Wink. Hopefully, my response here is enough for anyone who has the same issues with the video you do. There you go.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Well, there you have it, everyone. Even more hours of my life completely dedicated to informing you of the dangers of MCE. I cannot believe I've made an edited video this long. Wow. So what's the point of me doing this? What should be taken away from this video? 1. MCE is incredibly poorly designed, and while there are many things that can be done to help it outside of its own rules, there's nothing that can be done for it, rules as written. 2. Defending MCE is incredibly difficult due to the sheer amount of flaws it contains. 3. If you're watching this, and you still feel compelled to write your own counter-argument defending MCE, it's very important to understand the entirety of the game's rules, as well as the entirety of whichever of my points you're trying to counter. The most common fallacy in this video is the uninformed fallacy. People quite often said or argued things that strongly implied they didn't even watch the original MCE videos I made, that they're going out of their way to counter. It's very important to understand the counterpoint you're trying to counter before trying to counter it. Generally speaking, being professional with your counterpoints is the best way to go about it. All of the lying and name-calling ultimately gets you nowhere. I say this because I'm sure there will be more absurd counter-arguments following this video, so I really hope you've learned something when it comes to argumentative writing. Anyway, when it comes to MCE, it's honestly difficult to find an aspect of it that has a clean defense, because almost everything has a flaw. Despite MCE's flaws, you're still allowed to like it. I'm not saying you can't, whether you're willing to admit it or not though. If you're enjoying MCE rules as written, you are enjoying a flawed game, and that's totally fine. As long as you acknowledge the game is flawed instead of pretending it's flawless because you have fun with it, there are no issues here. If there's one insignificant thing about the world that I'll always hate, except for Dante's Peak, God, those volcanoes are so inaccurate, it's MCE. I will never stop hating it, no matter how many people attempt to defend it. So, who knows? Maybe someday people will go out of their way to generate enough content for a part 4. But my guess is that won't happen anytime soon. I want to thank you for watching all the way to the end. This took tons of work to make. So, assuming you listened to my advice at the start of the video by watching the previous MCE videos for context, and assuming you didn't just skip to the end of this video, I have a special surprise for you. Congratulations to everyone who made it here. You are now officially recognized by me, Luke, as informed about MCE and all that is wrong with it. Well done, viewer. A super special shout out goes out to those few commenters at the beginning who actually left logical, thought out, and constructive comments as well. You know what you're doing, and you're doing it well. Alright, that's enough talking for me. Always remember, MCE bad. Like the video if you in fact liked the video. Be sure to comment MCE bad in the comments, and have a fantastic sleep.